You rise before the sun, though there is no way to know the precise hour except by the quality of the darkness outside the paper screen, which is shifted from deep black to a soft charcoal grey. The house is still, the only sound a distant murmur of water moving somewhere out in the paddies, a sound so constant it has become a kind of silence itself. You lie still for a moment, letting your body adjust to wakefulness, feeling the slight chill of early morning air that seeps through the wooden walls and the straw thatch above. The thin futon beneath you has grown warm from your body, and the contrast between that warmth and the cool air on your face marks the edge between sleep and the day ahead. You sit up slowly, the rough cotton of your sleeping clothes rustling softly, and your feet find the worn wooden floorboards that have been smoothed by generations of bare soles. You move through the small house with the ease of long habit, your hands finding the sliding door frame, the edge of the wash basin, the wooden peg where your work clothes hang. The water in the earthenware basin is cold from the night, and you splash it on your face without hurry, letting it chase away the last clinging threads of sleep. Your work clothes are simple, a short indigo-dyed jacket and narrow trousers, both faded to a soft blue-grey from countless washings and long days in the sun. You wrap your feet in straw sandals, the woven cords rough against your skin, familiar as your own fingerprints. The house around you contains so few things: a low table, a clay teapot, a few bowls on a shelf, a small wooden chest for storing rice. Each object has its place, and each place has been the same for as long as you can remember. You slide open the wooden door, and the outside world rushes in with all its smells and sounds. The air is heavy with the scent of wet earth, saturated from the long rain that fell through the night, and there is also the green smell of growing rice, the clean mineral scent of running water, and a faint trace of wood smoke from a distant hearth somewhere down in the valley. The mist is so thick that you can see only a few paces ahead. Everything beyond that is soft grey-white, the shapes of trees and the outlines of the nearer terrace walls, just faint suggestions. You step outside and begin walking the familiar path that leads from the farmhouse to the upper edge of the rice terraces. The path is narrow, worn into the hillside by decades of daily footsteps, and this morning it is soft underfoot, each step sinking slightly into ground that has been thoroughly soaked. The straw of your sandals makes a faint squelching sound as you walk, and small puddles the colour of wheat tea have collected in the low places where the path dips. As you walk, you become aware of the many small sounds of water. There is the steady murmur of the main irrigation ditch to your left, running high and fast with rainwater, and also the lighter trickle of smaller streams crossing the path in shallow washes, and somewhere ahead the soft plash of overflow dropping from one terrace level to the next, a sound like someone pouring from a clay pot very slowly and very far away. These water sounds blend together, layering over each other, so that the whole hillside seems to be speaking in a low and constant voice. You pass the first of the bamboo pipes that carry water from the upper stream into the ditch, and you pause for a moment to listen to its note, which tells you whether the flow is steady or blocked. The note is clear and musical today, a low gurgle with no rasp or hiss, and so you continue walking without needing to stop and clear the intake. The path begins to slope more steeply, and you feel the stretch in the backs of your legs as you climb. On one side, a bank of wild grasses grows thick and wet, their blades bending under the weight of clinging droplets, On the other side, the land drops away into the first of the rice terraces, though you can see little of it yet through the mist. A stone has been dislodged from the path by the rain, a flat grey river stone that your grandfather likely set in place 40 or 50 years ago, and you stoop to pick it up, feeling its cool weight and the smoothness of its surface, polished by water long before any human hand touched it. You set it to the side of the path where you will remember to collect it later, and you make a small mental mark, one of many you will accumulate throughout the day, a quiet inventory of small tasks. You reach the edge of the uppermost terrace and stop, as you always do, to look across what you can see of the paddy. The mist is beginning to lift now, just slightly, pulling back from the water surface like a thin cloth drawn slowly away. The paddy stretches before you in a broad rectangle, perhaps 40 paces long and 30 wide. Its surface a single sheet of water that reflects the grey sky above so perfectly that the boundary between water and air seems uncertain. The rice seedlings stand in their neat rows, each plant a slender cluster of green blades no taller than your hand, their tips just barely breaking the water surface. They were planted only a few weeks ago, and they are still at that delicate stage when a sudden flood or a long dry spell could damage them. The water itself is moving, not in any obvious current, but in a slow, almost invisible drift, a barely perceptible flow from the intake at the upper left corner across the whole expanse to the drainage gap at the lower right. It is this slow movement that you have come to check, to see what the night rain has changed and what must be set right. You walk along the upper edge of the terrace, your feet following the narrow bund that serves as both path and retaining wall. The bund is maybe the width of your 2 feet placed side by side, its top planted with a tough variety of grass that helps hold the earth together. Here and there the rain has cut small grooves in the soil, miniature canyons no deeper than your thumb, and you note them without stopping, knowing they will need a little clay packed into them before the next rain comes. You reach the intake point where the main irrigation ditch empties into the paddy through a wooden sluice, and you crouch down to examine it more closely. The wooden boards of the sluice are dark with moisture, their grain raised and rough, and the water pours through the opening with a clear, steady rush, creating a small fan of white ripples where it meets the stiller water of the paddy. A few leaves have collected against the upstream side of the boards, oak leaves and the thin yellow needles of a cedar, and you pull them away one by one, letting them spin off downstream and disappear. The stones that frame the intake have held their positions well, though the mortar of packed clay between them has softened. You press a thumb into it and feel it gives slightly, still firm enough to hold for now, but worth watching if more rain comes. You make another mental note, another small entry in the day's ledger of tasks, and then you straighten up and continue your slow circuit of the terrace. Your feet find their own way along the narrow paths. You do not need to think about where to step, because every inch of this ground is known to you in a way that goes deeper than memory. The muscles of your legs know exactly how much to bend on each slope, and your body knows the precise tilt of the wet grass underfoot, and your ears know the difference between the sound of a properly flowing channel and one that is beginning to clog. It is a knowledge held in the body rather than the mind, a quiet competence that does not require thought. You walk the length of the upper terrace, and then you descend the stone steps to the middle level. The steps are 3 in number, each one a broad flat stone set into the embankment, and the lowest one wobbles slightly when you put your weight on it. A new development since yesterday, a sign that the rain has washed away some of the packing earth beneath. You step off it carefully and add another item to your mental list. Reset the third step. The middle terrace is smaller than the upper one, a narrow strip of paddy that follows the contour of the hillside like a green crescent. Its water is a little cloudier here, carrying a faint milkiness from silt washed down from above, and you can see where the sediment has begun to settle out in the calmer corners, forming soft brown fans on top of the existing soil. This too is nothing to worry about yet, just the normal work of water moving earth from one place to another, a slow rearrangement that has been going on for centuries and will continue long after you are gone. At the far end of the middle terrace, the small breach has opened in the retaining wall where the pressure of water backed up behind it during the heaviest part of the storm found a weak spot in the stonework. The gap is no wider than your hand, and the water is not gushing through it, but only seeping, a dark wet stain spreading down the outside of the wall and dripping into the drainage channel below. You kneel beside it and examine the damage more closely. 3 stones have shifted out of alignment, one of them now tilted at an angle that leaves a triangular gap at its bottom edge. The mud behind them is soft and wet, and when you press it with your finger, water wells up and trickles out more quickly. This will be the first real task of the morning, and you feel a quiet readiness for it. Not eagerness exactly, but a sense of purpose settling into your hands. Your tools wait in a small shed further down the slope, a structure of weathered cedar wood with a thatched roof that has grown a thin coat of moss on its northern side. You walk down to it now, passing the lower terrace and the drainage gate at its far end, though you do not stop to examine them yet. The shed door is a single plank that lifts out of its groove, and you set it aside and step into the dim interior. The smell inside is of earth and iron and old straw, the accumulated scent of many seasons of work. A wooden hoe hangs from a peg on the wall, its handle dark with the oil of hands, its blade worn to a curve that fits the soil perfectly. Beside it hang a sickle, a small adze, a coil of rope made from rice straw, and a flat basket for carrying earth. On a low shelf sits a sharpening stone in a wooden tray, a clay bottle of oil for the blades, and a few spare wedges for the sluice gates. Everything has its place, and everything is exactly where it should be. You take the hoe and the basket, and you also pick up the heavy iron tamping bar, a length of metal as thick as your wrist with a flattened end for pressing earth into place. The bar is cold in your hands, its surface pitted with rust, and it weighs enough that you feel the pull in your shoulders as you carry it back up the slope. The mist has continued to thin while you were in the shed, and now you can see further across the valley, the grey-green shapes of other hillsides emerging, each one cut into its own pattern of terraces, some still hidden in the last trailing wisps of cloud. You can see the dark line of the forest up above, the cedar and bamboo that grow on the steeper ground too high for paddies, and you can see the faint ribbon of the main stream descending through a ravine, its water a pale thread against the dark vegetation. Back at the middle terrace, you set down your tools and begin the repair. The first step is to remove the shifted stones, lifting them out one by one and setting them on the grass beside you. They are heavy, each one a piece of the local grey schist that splits naturally into flat slabs, and their surfaces are slick with mud. You wipe each one clean with a handful of wet grass before setting it aside, and you try not to disturb the undamaged stones on either side of the breach. With the stones removed, you can see the cavity behind them, a small hollow where the water has eaten away the clay packing. You take the hoe and begin to clear out the loose, soupy mud, working carefully so as not to whiten the hull. The mud comes away in heavy clumps, dark and smooth, and you pile it in the basket. When you reach firmer earth, you stop digging and begin to rebuild. You fetch fresh clay from a small pit at the edge of the terrace where a supply is always kept, a mound of dense grey-blue material that you dig from a deeper layer of the hillside. The clay is sticky and cool, and you work it between your hands to warm it and make it pliable, kneading it like dough until it forms a single cohesive mass. You pack it into the cavity behind the stone wall, pressing it firmly with your fingers and then with the flat end of the tamping bar, building it up in thin layers so that no air pockets remain. Each layer compresses under the bar with a soft, wet sound, and you work slowly, because clay that is not properly compacted will settle unevenly and leave gaps for water to find. When the cavity is filled almost to the level of the wall face, you begin setting the stones back in place. The first stone, the largest, goes at the bottom where its weight will anchor the whole section. You lower it into position carefully, feeling its edges align with the neighboring stones, and you tap it gently with the wooden handle of the hoe until it sits exactly where it was before the rain moved it. The second stone fits against it, a little smaller, its top edge matching the slope of the wall, and the third stone, the one that had tilted, now slides back into its proper place so neatly that the gap disappears. You pack more clay into the cracks between them, working it in with your thumb, scraping away the excess with a flat stick until the joints are tight and clean. Finally, you pour a bucket of water over the repaired section to test it, watching to see if any seeps through. The water runs down the face of the wall in a smooth sheet, and the stones hold dry behind. You sit back on your heels and look at your work, and the breach is gone, only a slightly darker patch of stone and a faint seam of fresh clay to show where the repair was made. No one but you will ever notice it. The morning has advanced while you worked, though you could not say how much time has passed. The sun is still hidden behind the clouds, but the light has brightened enough that the mist has thinned to a faint haze, and the world has taken on its daytime colors, the many shades of green in the rice plants and the grass, the grey-brown of the wet earth, the blue-grey of the stones, the pale silver of the water. You gather your tools and walk back down to the shed to put away the tamping bar and the hoe, and then you pause there for a moment, drinking from the dipper that hangs beside the small water barrel. The water tastes of the wooden barrel and the rain it was gathered from, a taste that is not quite sweet, but clean and cold. You pour a little over your hands to wash off the clay, rubbing your palms together, feeling the grit wash away. The middle terrace repair is finished, but there is still the whole long day ahead, and you feel no urgency about any of it. You step back outside the shed and look up at the sky, which remains a soft, unbroken grey from horizon to horizon. There is no wind, and the air is still cool, the kind of coolness that will linger until the clouds break and the sun comes through, which may not happen today at all. A bird calls from somewhere in the forest, a single clear note repeated 3 times, and then silence again, except for the water. The drainage gate at the lower terrace makes its steady rushing sound, and the irrigation ditch continues its murmur, and the small leaks you have not yet found continue their quiet seepage, and all it together forms a single fabric of sound that wraps around you like the mist wrapped around the hillside at dawn. You pick up the flat basket and begin walking toward the lateral channel that runs between the middle and lower terraces, where the rain has left a tangle of debris that will need clearing, and the day moves on in its quiet, unhurried way. The upper terrace wall is the oldest structure on the hillside, built by your great-grandfather in a time when the village was still recovering from a landslide that had reshaped the whole valley. You know this not from any written record, but because your own father pointed to the wall once when you were a boy and told you, in his quiet way, that it had stood through 3 generations of storms and would stand through 3 more if it was cared for. The wall is made of the same grey schist that underlies the whole mountain, stones that were carried up from the stream bed one by one and fitted together so carefully that no mortar was needed between them, only the weight of each stone pressing down and outward against its neighbours. Over the decades, rain and settling earth had opened small gaps, and each generation had packed those gaps with clay dug from the hillside, so that the wall was now a patchwork of grey stone and brown clay, all of it working together to hold back the heavy wet soil of the paddy. This morning, as you approach the upper terrace with your tools, you can see that the wall has suffered more than the small leaks you found lower down. A section near the centre has slumped outward, not a complete collapse, but a bulging displacement that has opened a gap large enough to put both hands through. The stones that once formed the face of the wall have tumbled forward into a pile half buried in the mud at the base, and water from the paddy above is trickling steadily through the breach, a clear stream that runs down the outside of the wall and pools in the drainage channel below. You stand for a moment, taking in the shape of the damage, the way the remaining stones on either side of the breach are still holding firm, the way the mud behind the gap has flowed outward and is now crusting over in the morning air. It looks worse than it is, you decide. The wall is still essentially sound, and the repair will be slow but not difficult, a matter of putting back what the rain pushed out. You kneel beside the fallen stones, feeling the wet grass soak through the knees of your trousers. The mud at the base of the wall is deep and soft, and your fingers sink into it as you begin to clear away the debris that has washed down. Small twigs, clumps of grass, a few drowned insects. You work with your hands first, pulling the loose material aside until you can see the shapes of the fallen stones clearly. There are 5 of them, plus a few smaller shards that have broken off from the edges. The largest one, a flat slab that once formed the keystone of the section, is now lying face down in the mud, half sunk. You grip it by its edges and try to lift it, but it is heavier than you expected, and you have to shift your position, bracing your feet against a firm spot in the turf before you can raise it. The stone comes up with a soft sucking sound, the mud releasing it reluctantly, and you set it to one side on a patch of dry grass. The other stones are smaller and easier to move. One by one you lift them out of the mud and place them beside the first, sorting them by size as you go. The largest stone goes at one end of the row, then the next largest, then the 2 medium ones, then the smallest shards at the far end. Each stone has a different character. One is roughly rectangular with sharp corners that have barely been worn. Another is oval and smooth all over. A third has a ridge running diagonally across its face, where a harder vein of mineral resisted the river's erosion. You take a moment to clean each one, using a handful of wet grass to scrub away the mud, and as you work, you can feel the texture of the stone under your fingers, the coolness of it, the weight of it resting on your palm. Some of these stones were cut and placed by your great-grandfather, their edges still bearing the marks of his iron chisel. small parallel grooves that you can trace with your thumbnail. Others were added later, perhaps by your grandfather, perhaps by your father, and they showed different tool marks or no marks at all, just the natural smoothness of river-worn rock. With the stones cleaned and sorted, you turn your attention to the cavity in the wall. The hole is shaped like a rough triangle, wider at the bottom than at the top, and the earth behind it has slumped outward into a soft mound. You fetch the wooden shovel from where you left it leaning against a nearby boulder, its blade worn thin and pale from years of digging, and you begin to clear the loose mud from the breach. The mud is heavy with water, and each shovelful makes a wet, squelching sound as you lift it. You dump the mud into a flat basket, and when the basket is full, you carry it to the edge of the terrace and empty it over the side, where it slaps softly onto the grass below. The work is repetitive and slow, but there is a certain rhythm to it. Dig, lift, carry, dump, return. You fall into that rhythm without thinking, your body doing what it knows how to do, while your mind drifts across the surface of the morning. As you dig, the cavity deepens and widens until you have exposed the firm, dry clay that lies beneath the saturated upper layer. This is the material you will use to rebuild. The dense grey-blue clay that is so thick and sticky it must be worked with both hands. You stop shoveling and examine the exposed clay, pressing it with your fingers to test its moisture. It is damp but not wet, pliable but not soft, and you decide it will serve well as a bedding for the stones. You take up the tamping bar, the same heavy iron bar you used earlier on the middle terrace, and you begin to compact the clay at the base of the cavity, pounding it down with short, steady strokes. Each stroke makes a dull, solid sound, and the clay firms up under the impact until it is as hard as the floor of your house. This will be the foundation on which the first stone rests. Now you begin to rebuild. You select the largest stone, the one that formed the keystone before the slump, and you carry it to the wall. It is heavy enough that you must hold it with both hands, cradling it against your chest, and when you set it down at the base of the cavity, you feel the solid thud as it meets the packed clay. You adjust its position, nudging it one way and then the other, until it sits flush against the undamaged stones on either side. The fit is not perfect. There is a gap along the bottom edge where the clay has compressed unevenly, and you pack more clay into that gap, working it in with your fingers and then with the flat end of the tamping bar. You test the stone with your hands, pressing down on it, trying to rock it from side to side, and it holds firm, a solid anchor. The second stone goes above the first, a little smaller and lighter. You lift it into place, feeling the muscles in your shoulders and back engage, and you set it so that its top edge aligns with the top edges of the neighboring stones in the undamaged part of the wall. There is a satisfying click as it settles, stone against stone, and the gap between it and the keystone is narrow enough that only a thin line of clay will be needed to seal it. You work the clay into the joint with your thumb, pressing it deep, then scraping the excess away with a flat chip of bamboo. The joint disappears and the two stones become one continuous surface. The third stone is an odd shape, roughly triangular, and it takes you longer to fit it into place. You try it one way, then turn it, then try it again, until you find the orientation where it fits most snugly against the stones already set. Even then, there is a wide gap along one side where the angle of the stone does not quite match the angle of the wall, and you must fill that gap with smaller stone shards, tapping them in gently with the handle of the hoe until they are wedged tight. This is how the old walls were built, with patience and small adjustments, and you are simply repeating a process that has been repeated many times before on this same spot. As you work, the water in the paddy behind you continues its slow, steady movement. The breach is not yet sealed, and a thin stream of water still trickles through the gaps between the stones you have set. But the stream is growing weaker as each new stone closes more of the opening. You can hear the water lapping against the inside of the wall, a soft, rhythmic sound like a tongue clicking against the roof of a mouth. It is the sound of the paddy testing the repair, finding the small leaks, pressing against the weak spots, and it will continue testing until every gap is closed and every stone is seated firmly in its bed of clay. You listen to this sound as you work, and it tells you where you need to pack more clay, where a joint is not yet tight enough, where a stone needs another small adjustment. You pause occasionally to straighten your back and look out across the valley. The mist has lifted entirely now, and the view is wide and clear. Below you, the middle and lower terraces stretch out in their green steps, and beyond them, the hillside drops away into a narrow valley, where a stream threads through a grove of bamboo. On the far side of the valley you can see the terraces of your neighbors, their paddies, a slightly different shade of green. Their retaining walls built from a different kind of stone that is more yellow than grey. You can see someone moving on one of those far terraces, a tiny figure in a straw hat, bending and straightening, perhaps mending their own walls after the storm. The sight is oddly comforting, a reminder that you are not alone in this work, that all across the valley other farmers are doing exactly what you are doing, putting the land back in order after the rain. You turn back to the wall and continue building upward. The fourth stone goes in, then the fifth, and now the breach is nearly closed, only a small triangular gap remaining at the very top. You select the last stone, the smallest of the 5, and you fit it into the gap carefully, working it down into place with gentle pressure. It slides in smoothly, and the breach is gone. You sit back on your heels and look at your work. The wall is whole again, the stones fitted together in a new pattern that is slightly different from the old one, because you could not put them back in exactly the same order. The joints are visible as thin brown lines, but over time the clay will weather and darken, and the new stones will grow a coat of moss like the old ones, and the repair will blend into the wall until no one can tell where the breach was. But the work is not yet finished. The outside face of the wall needs to be reinforced with a buttress of packed earth, because the rain may have weakened the foundation on this side, and you want to be sure the wall will hold through the next storm. You fetch the flat basket and fill it with clay from the pit at the edge of the terrace, the same pit you used earlier for the middle terrace repair. The clay is cool and heavy, and you carry it back to the wall in several trips, piling it against the base of the repaired section. You use the tamping bar to compress the clay, building it up in layers, shaping it into a gentle slope that will shed water outward rather than letting it pool against the stones. The tamping bar rises and falls in a steady rhythm, and the clay firms up under the impacts until it is smooth and hard, a solid ramp that braces the wall from below. You step back and examine your work one more time. The repair is complete. The stones are in place, the joints are sealed, the buttress is packed, and the water in the paddy has stopped trickling through and now laps against the inside of the wall with a contented sound, as if it too is satisfied. You collect your tools, the shovel and the tamping bar and the basket, and you carry them down to the shed, where you will put them away and rest for a moment, before moving on to the next task. The morning is still young, or perhaps it is already afternoon. You are not sure, and it does not matter. There is still the lateral channel to clear, still the bunds to mend, still the steps to reset, but for now, the upper terrace wall is whole again, and that is enough. The lateral channel runs between the middle and lower terraces like a narrow seam stitched across the hillside, carrying excess water from the upper paddies down to the drainage gate and from there into the natural stream bed below. It is not a deep channel, no wider than the span of your two hands laid side by side, and in dry weather it holds only a trickle so thin you can barely hear it. But after a night of heavy rain, it becomes a small river in its own right, rushing along with a voice of its own and carrying with it whatever the storm has washed loose from the slopes above, leaves, twigs, clumps of moss, the pale skeletons of last autumn's reeds. This morning, as you walk along its edge with a narrow hoe in your hand, you can see that the channel has been doing its work faithfully, but it is now half choked with debris and needs to be cleared before the next rain comes and pushes the water over the banks. You begin at the upper end, where the channel takes its first water from a notch cut in the bund of the middle terrace. Here the flow is strongest, a steady stream that pours over the lip of the notch with a clear, musical sound and foams white where it strikes the stones at the bottom. A tangle of wet leaves has collected just below the drop, oak leaves mostly, their brown lobes plastered flat against the stones, along with a few long needles from the cedar tree's upslope, and a single branch about the length of your arm that has wedged itself crosswise in the channel. You reach down and pull the branch free, feeling the rough bark against your palm, and you toss it onto the grass bank where it will dry out and eventually be collected for kindling. The leaves are more stubborn, clinging to the stones as if they have grown roots, and you have to scrape them loose with the edge of your hoe, working the blade under each mat of vegetation and levering it up until the water can get beneath it and carry it away. The freed leaves spin off downstream, turning slow circles in the current, and you watch them go until they disappear around the first bend. With the upper intake clear, you begin to work your way slowly downstream, following the channel as it curves along the contour of the hillside. The walking is easy, the grass on the bank soft and springy under your straw sandals, and the water beside you runs with a cheerful gurgle, now that it is no longer fighting through the debris. You hold the hoe loosely in one hand, its handle worn smooth by the grip of many seasons, and every few steps you stop to clear another small obstruction. Here a clump of water weeds has rooted itself in a slow eddy, their long green stems waving in the current like hair under water. You hook them with a hoe and pull them free, shaking the mud from their roots before tossing them onto the bank. There a mat of moss has slid down from the terrace wall and is now half submerged, a thick green carpet that blocks the flow and makes the water back up behind it in a shallow pool. You cut it into sections with the hoe blade and lift each section out separately, the moss heavy and cold in your hands, dripping water down your wrists and into the sleeves of your jacket. The channel passes through a small grove of bamboo part way down, and here the debris is different. The bamboo has shed its papery sheaths, and these are blown into the water during the storm, where they now float in a yellow-brown raft that stretches from bank to bank. You kneel beside the channel and begin to scoop them out with your hands, because the hoe blade is too wide for this delicate work, and might tear the sheaths into smaller pieces that would only wash further down and cause more blockages. The sheaths are thin and smooth, almost silky, and they fold easily as you gather them into a pile on the bank. Some have already begun to soften and break apart, their fibers separating into fine threads that drift away in the current like strands of pale silk. When you have cleared enough of them that the water can flow freely again, you use a few of the sturdier sheaths to sweep the remaining fragments into a single mass, which you then lift out and add to the pile. The pile will rot down over the summer and become part of the soil, feeding the wild grasses that grow along the bank. Beyond the bamboo grove, the channel straightens out for a long stretch, and here the problem is not debris, but silt. The stormwater, running fast and turbid, has dropped its load of suspended earth in this level section where the current slows, and the bottom of the channel is now buried under a layer of fine brown mud, perhaps the thickness of your hand. You can see where the water is flowing over the top of the silt in a thin, clear sheet, but underneath that sheet the channel is slowly filling in, and if it is not cleaned out, the water will eventually rise high enough to spill over the banks and flood the path. You step down into the channel itself, feeling the cold water close around your ankles and soak through the straw of your sandals. The mud at the bottom is soft and silky, and your feet sink into it until you feel the firmer gravel beneath. You begin to work the hoe along the bottom of the channel, pushing the blade into the mud and drawing it toward you in long, steady strokes. Each stroke lifts a mound of silt that clouds the water like smoke and is carried away by the current, and you work your way slowly down the straight section, stroke after stroke, the hoe blade scraping softly against the gravel at the bottom. The work is repetitive and undemanding, the kind of work that leaves your mind free to wander while your body continues the motion. You find yourself listening to the sounds of the valley, the distant call of a crow from somewhere up in the cedars, the fainter sound of water falling from one terrace to the next, further down the slope, the soft whisper of the breeze moving through the bamboo grove behind you. The sun is still hidden behind the clouds, but the light has changed again, growing a little brighter, a little warmer, and you can feel the first hint of midday in the way the air smells. A faint green sweetness rising from the wet grass and the rice plants. You work steadily, moving down the channel one slow pace at a time, and the water at your feet gradually clears as the silt is washed away and the bottom of the channel emerges again, clean gravel and smooth stones that glint faintly under the moving surface. At the end of the straight section, the channel bends sharply to the left and then drops over a small cascade, a fall of perhaps 2 handspans where the water spills over a ledge of bedrock into a shallow pool. This is where the heaviest debris always collects because the force of the waterfall pushes floating material down into the pool where it circles and circles until it becomes waterlogged and sinks. You climb out of the channel and walk around to the pool, and sure enough, it is full of soaked leaves, small branches, and a single wooden clog that must have been washed down from some farmstead higher up the slope. The clog is old and worn, its wood dark with water, its straw rope frayed at the heel, and you fish it out with a hoe and set it on a rock to dry, thinking that someone may come looking for it, though they probably will not. The leaves and branches you scoop out by hand, working from the edge of the pool where the water is shallowest, and you pile them on the bank to join the other debris. The pool clears slowly, its water swirling with fine particles that gradually settle out, and you wait a moment, watching the surface grow still and reflective until you can see your own face looking up from the dark water, a face shadowed by the wide brim of your hat. A small frog jumps from a clump of wet grass at the edge of the pool and disappears into the water with a soft plop. You watch the ripples spread out across the surface, concentric rings that widen and fade and widen again until they reach the rocky edge and disappear. The frog is a small brown creature, no bigger than your thumb, and it is now sitting motionless on the bottom of the pool, its eyes two tiny gold beads, its throat pulsing with each breath. You leave it undisturbed and continue downstream, where the channel narrows again and runs between two large boulders that have been in place since the hillside was first carved into terraces. The gap between the boulders is tight, and debris often catches here, but today it is relatively clear, only a few sticks wedged crosswise that you pull free easily. The water rushes through the gap with a low, throaty sound, and you pause for a moment with your hand resting on one of the boulders, feeling the cool roughness of the stone and the faint vibration of the water passing through. Beyond the boulders, the channel widens out into a shallow basin where the water spreads thin and slow. This basin was dug long ago by your father, who saw that the water needed a place to rest before it reached the drainage gate, a settling pond where any remaining silt could drop out. The bottom of the basin is covered with a fine layer of mud that has been accumulating all spring, and it is now deep enough that the water barely moves across it, a sheet so thin and clear you can see every detail of the bottom. You wade into the basin, the water rising only to your shins, and you begin to scrape the mud toward the outlet with your hoe, working in a fan pattern from the edges inward. The mud moves slowly, a heavy brown cloud that rolls along the bottom and is gradually pushed through the narrow opening at the far end, where it spills into the final section of the channel and is carried away. You work methodically, your hoe strokes overlapping, until the bottom of the basin is clean gravel once more and the water runs clear from edge to edge. You straighten up and stretch your back, feeling the muscles loosen after being bent over for so long. The channel is nearly clear now, and you can see the drainage gate at the lower end, a dark rectangle of wood against the green of the paddy beyond. You walk the last stretch slowly, not because there is much left to do, but because you want to be thorough, checking the banks for any small leaks or weak spots that might need attention. Here the grass on the bank has been undercut by the current, leaving a small overhang that will eventually collapse if not reinforced. You make a mental note to pack some clay under it later. There a stone has rolled into the channel and is diverting the flow slightly to one side. You reach down and lift it out, placing it back on the bank where it belongs. These are small things barely worth stopping for, but they are part of the same quiet work of maintenance, the constant small adjustments that keep the terraces functioning day after day. You reach the drainage gate at last, and you stop there to wash the mud from your hands and the blade of your hoe. The gate is a simple wooden structure, a frame of cedar planks with a sliding board that can be raised or lowered to control the outflow. It is open now, and the water from the channel pours through it in a steady stream, falling into the natural stream bed below with a continuous rushing sound that you have been hearing in the background all morning. You crouch beside the gate and dip your hands into the flow, rubbing the mud from your palms and from under your fingernails, feeling the cool water run over your skin. You splash a little on your face, and it is cold and clean, washing away the faint sweat that has gathered on your forehead. Then you clean the hoe blade, holding it under the stream and scraping off the clinging mud with a flat chip of stone until the metal shines dull grey in the light. You stand at the drainage gate for a long moment, looking back up the length of the lateral channel you've just cleared. The water runs clean and fast now, its surface unbroken by floating debris, its banks neat and firm. The sound it makes is a steady, cheerful murmur, and the whole length of it gleams like a silver thread laid across the green hillside. You can see the places where you worked, the bare spot on the bank where you piled the bamboo sheaths, the wet rocks where the cascade spills over, the dark opening between the two boulders. The channel is ready for the next rain, and when it comes, the water will flow through without obstruction, carrying away only what it is meant to carry away. You turn from the gate and begin the walk back up toward the shed, where your other tools are waiting, and the rest of the day's tasks are spread out before you like the terraces themselves, one small, quiet piece at a time. The low earthen bunds that divide the flooded plots are narrow raised paths, their tops planted with a tough, close-crop grass that helps hold the soil together. They serve as both walkways and water barriers, keeping each paddy's depth separate from its neighbor, and after a heavy rain they are often the first places to show damage. Rodents burrow into them during the wet months, and the stormwater finds those burrows and widens them, carving small tunnels that let the water escape from one level to the next in thin, persistent streams. This morning, as you walk the bunds with a basket of mixed clay and chopped straw, you can see the tiny leaks everywhere. Here a steady trickle running from a hole the size of your thumb. There a dark wet patch spreading on the downhill side of the bund where water is seeping through a crack too narrow to see. The leaks are not dramatic, but if they are left, they will grow, and the paddies will slowly drain into each other, and the careful balance of water levels will be lost. You begin on the upper terrace, where the bund that separates it from the middle level shows several small breaches. The first one is a classic rodent hole, a neat round tunnel that goes straight through the earth and emerges on the other side in a miniature waterfall. You kneel beside it on the wet grass, feeling the cold damp soak through the knees of your trousers, and you set the basket down within easy reach. The clay in the basket is a mixture you prepared earlier, dense grey-blue clay from the pit mixed with chopped rice straw that acts as a binder, the fibers knitting together to give the patch strength. You take a handful of the mixture and begin to pack it into the hole, pushing it in with your fingers, working it deep. The water trickles through as you pack, but gradually, as you add more clay and press it tighter, the trickle slows and then stops. You smooth the surface with your palm, blending the patch into the surrounding earth, and then you move on to the next leak. The second leak is a crack rather than a hole, a long vertical fissure that has opened in the side of the bund where the earth has dried and shrunk and then been soaked again too quickly. Water is seeping from it in a thin sheet, darkening the grass below. You scoop out a larger handful of the clay mixture and begin to force it into the crack, using your thumb and the flat blade of a small wooden spatula you carry for this purpose. The crack is narrow and the clay must be worked in carefully, a little at a time, building it up from the deepest part outward, until the fissure is filled and the surface is smooth. You wipe away the excess with a handful of wet grass, and the crack disappears, its location marked only by the darker color of the fresh clay against the older earth. You work your way along the bund, finding and filling leaks, your basket growing lighter as you go. Some of the leaks are so small they are barely more than damp spots, and you mark them with a mental note to check again later. Others are more serious, a series of interconnected holes that suggest a larger cavity inside the bund, and these require more clay and more care. You probe them with a long, thin stick, feeling for the edges of the hollow, and then you pack the clay mixture in stages, letting each layer firm up a little before adding the next. The work is slow and repetitive, and your hands grow cold and stiff from the wet clay. But there is a rhythm to it that becomes almost meditative. Find the leak, clear the loose earth, pack the clay, smooth the surface, move on. The grey sky overhead remains unbroken, and the air is cool and still, and the only sounds are the trickle of the leaks you have not yet found, and the steady murmur of the irrigation ditch. By the time you have finished the upper bund, the basket is nearly empty, and your hands are coated in a thin grey film of clay that dries and cracks as you flex your fingers. You walk down to the lateral channel and kneel beside it, washing your hands in the cold, fast water, watching the clay dissolve and swirl away downstream. Then you refill the basket from the clay pit, working the heavy material with your hands, mixing in fresh straw, and you move on to the middle terrace, where the bunds are longer and there are more leaks to find. The middle terrace bunds are wetter underfoot, the grass more lush, and the leaks here are different. In some places the water has undercut the bund from below, carving out small overhangs that will eventually collapse if not filled in. You work your way along on your hands and knees, reaching under the overhangs to pack clay into the cavities, feeling the cold mud squelch around your wrists. In other places, the damage is above the waterline, small gullies where the rain ran down the side of the bund and eroded channels in the bare earth. These you fill with the clay mixture, and then press flat stones into the surface to armor them against future rain, tapping each stone gently with the wooden handle of the hoe until it sits flush. You move from one leak to the next, your footsteps slow and careful on the slippery grass, and the work blurs into a single continuous task. The rice plants stand in their neat rows beside you, their slender green shoots each tipped with a tiny drop of water, and you are close enough to smell their green growing scent, a smell that is clean and faintly sweet. Occasionally, a frog jumps from the paddy and plops into the water, or a dragonfly lands on a rice leaf and then darts away, its wings a blur of blue. You notice these things without really noticing, just as you notice the way the light shifts slightly as the clouds thin and thicken overhead. The lower terrace bunds are the most damaged, because they bear the weight of all the water from the upper paddies, and the rain has found every weak spot. There is one section where a whole corner of the bund has slumped, the earth saturated and heavy, and you spend a long time there, digging out the loose material and rebuilding it in layers, tamping each layer with the iron bar until it is firm. The work makes your shoulders ache, but it is a good ache, a feeling of strength being used, and when the corner is rebuilt and the last leak is sealed, you step back and look at the bund, and it is solid and whole, the water and the paddy lapping gently against it, but finding no way through. The bunds are mended. You gather your empty basket and your tools and walk back along the narrow paths, your feet sure on the wet grass, and you feel the quiet satisfaction of another task completed. The terraces are holding their water now, each paddy separate from its neighbor, each one a small, still world of its own. You stop at the edge of the upper terrace and look out across the valley, where the fog has finally lifted and the far hillsides are clear and green under the grey sky. Somewhere a temple bell sounds faintly across the distance, marking an hour you do not count, and you turn back toward the shed to put away your tools and rest for a moment before the next task begins. The stone steps that connect the middle terrace to the lower one are 3 in number, each a single flat slab of the local grey schist set into the steep embankment like wide, shallow stairs. They were placed long before your time, and the earth that beds them has been packed and repacked by many hands over many seasons, so that by now the steps seem almost to have grown from the hillside, their surfaces worn smooth and slightly concave by the passage of countless bare feet and straw sandals. In dry weather they are solid and sure, each one ringing with a faint dull note when you step on it. But after a heavy rain like the one that fell last night, the packing earth sometimes softens and shifts, and the stones can tilt or settle unevenly. This morning, as you descend from the lateral channel with your hoe still wet from cleaning, you notice that the lowest step is no longer flat. One corner has sunk, and the whole slab now leans at a slight angle toward the downhill side, a tilt that would be dangerous in the dark or when carrying a heavy load. You stop on the middle step and study the problem. The sunken corner is the right-hand side, the side closest to the drainage channel, and you can see where water has been seeping under the edge of the stone, washing away the fine gravel and clay that once supported it. A small hollow has opened beneath, and when you press on the high side of the stone with your foot, the low side lifts slightly with a wet, grinding sound, stone shifting against stone. The problem is not severe yet, but it will grow worse if it is left, because every person who steps on the tilted stone will press it further out of true, and the next heavy rain will wash more earth from underneath until the whole step becomes unstable. You make a mental note to fetch the iron bar from the shed, the same heavy bar you used earlier for tamping clay, because it can also serve as a lever for shifting stones back into position. You finish your descent carefully, stepping over the tilted slab and onto the firm grass below, and you walk the short distance to the tool shed. The shed sits on a flat patch of ground just beyond the lower terrace, a small structure of weathered cedar planks with a roof of rice straw thatch that is darkened over the years to a deep brown grey. The thatch is mossy on the north side, a thin cushion of green that glows faintly in the overcast light, and a single strand of old rope holds the door plank in place when it is lifted into its groove. You remove the door plank and lean it against the outside wall, and the familiar smell of the shed washes over you, a smell you have known since childhood: dry earth, iron oxide, old straw, and the faint sharpness of the oil you use on the blades. The interior is dim, lit only by what light comes through the open doorway and a few thin gaps between the wall planks, but you know where everything is without needing to see it clearly. The iron bar hangs from 2 wooden pegs on the back wall, its surface dark with age and lightly coated with oil to keep the rust from growing too thick. You lift it down and feel its weight settle into your hands, a familiar heft that you have carried up and down these terraces many times. The bar is as long as your arm, round in cross-section, with one end flattened into a wedge shape for prying and the other end left blunt for tamping. You carry it back to the steps, resting it across your shoulder, and when you reach the tilted slab, you set the wedge end under the low side and begin to work it gently into the gap between stone and earth. The bar slides in with some resistance, grating against small stones and compacted clay, and you push it deeper with short, steady movements until you have enough leverage to lift. You lean your weight onto the long end of the bar, slowly and carefully, feeling the stone begin to move. It rises with a wet, gritty sound, the hollow beneath it exposed now as a dark cavity where water gleams faintly. You hold the stone in its raised position with one hand on the bar, while you use your other hand to scoop fresh gravel from a small pile you keep nearby, tucking it under the lifted corner, pushing it as far back into the cavity as your fingers can reach. The gravel is mixed with dry clay, and you pack it down with your fist before lowering the stone back into place. You remove the bar and test the step with your foot, pressing down on the corner that had sunk. It holds firm, or at least firmer than before, but you can feel that the packing beneath is still not as solid as it should be, and you decide to lift the stone again and add more material. This time you work more methodically, raising the slab a little higher and clearing out the soft, wet mud that has accumulated underneath. The mud is dark and cold, and it smells faintly of rotting leaves, the kind of anaerobic scent that tells you the drainage under this step has been poor for some time. You scoop it out with your hands, flinging it aside onto the grass until you reach drier, firmer earth. Then you fetch more gravel and clay from the pile, and you begin to rebuild the foundation in thin layers, tamping each layer down with the blunt end of the iron bar before adding the next. The tamping makes a dull, rhythmic sound, and you settle into the work, letting the repetition carry you along. Layer after layer, the foundation rises, until at last you judge it high enough and firm enough to receive the stone. You lower the slab carefully, guiding it into place with both hands, and it settles onto its new bed with a solid, satisfying thud. You test it again, pressing with your full weight, and this time it does not move. The step is true once more. You stand on the repaired step and look back up the slope, checking the other two stones. The middle step seems solid, but the top one has a small crack running across its width, a hairline fracture that you have noticed before and that does not seem to have grown any larger since the last rain. You make a note to keep watching it, and then you carry the iron bar back to the shed where you wipe it clean with an oiled rag before hanging it back on its pegs. Now that you are in the shed, you decide to spend a little time on the small maintenance tasks that accumulate here over the weeks. The shed is not just a storehouse for tools, it is also a kind of quiet workshop where blades are sharpened and handles are tightened, and coils of rope are kept neat. There is a low wooden bench along one wall, its surface scarred with the marks of many small repairs, and you sit down on a section of log that serves as a stool, feeling the rough wood through the cloth of your trousers. The air inside the shed is still and cool, and the sounds of the valley seem distant now, muffled by the walls and the thick thatch overhead. The sickle hangs on its peg, its curved blade dark with a thin film of rust that has formed since the last time it was used. You take it down and examine it in the dim light, running your thumb along the edge to feel where the metal is still sharp and where it has dulled. The sickle is an old tool, its wooden handle polished to a deep brown by the grip of many harvests, and the blade has been sharpened so many times that it is noticeably narrower than it was when it was new. You sit with the sickle across your knees and reach for the small earthenware bottle of camellia oil that sits on the shelf, along with a soft rag made from an old cotton cloth. You pour a few drops of oil onto the blade, and the oil spreads out in a thin, pale film that catches the light. Then you begin to rub the blade with the rag, working the oil into the metal with slow, circular motions, covering every part of the surface from the thick spine to the thin cutting edge. The oil drives out the moisture that has begun to rust the steel, and the blade slowly brightens under your hands, the dark film giving way to a dull grey gleam. You turn the sickle over and oil the other side, and then you wipe the handle too, because the wood can dry out and crack if it is not cared for. The oil soaks into the wood quickly, darkening it to a rich, warm brown, and you can smell the faint, nutty fragrance of the camellia rising in the still air of the shed. When the sickle is fully oiled, you hang it back on its peg and move on to the next tool. The small hand adze, the one you use for trimming wooden sluice boards and shaping bamboo pegs, has a loose handle. You notice it as soon as you pick it up, a slight wobble where the wooden haft enters the iron head. This happens from time to time, especially after wet weather, because the wood swells and shrinks with changes in humidity and can work itself loose from the metal socket. You find a thin wedge of bamboo in a small clay pot on the shelf, a wedge you cut for this purpose long ago and have used several times since. You tap the old wedge out of the socket with the handle of a wooden mallet, and then you fit the new wedge into place, tapping it home with short, precise strokes. The wedge forces the wood fibers apart inside the socket, tightening the fit until the head is firm and solid once more. You test it by gripping the handle and twisting, and the head does not budge. You put the adze back on its hook and brush the wood shavings from the bench onto the floor, where they will eventually be swept out or simply trampled into the earth. A coil of rope made from rice straw hangs on a wooden peg near the door. The rope is used for binding bundles of cut rice at harvest time and for lashing the bamboo frames of the sluice gates, and over the past few weeks it has become tangled from being pulled off the peg in a hurry. The coil is no longer neat. Its strands twisted and kinked in several places, and one end has come loose and is trailing on the floor. You lift the coil down and sit with it in your lap, beginning the slow work of untangling the mess. The rope is rough against your palms, its fibers dry and golden, and it smells of the paddy, a smell of sun and straw and harvest. You find the loose end and begin to work it back through the tangles, pulling it gently, never forcing it, because forcing a straw rope will only make the kinks tighter and may break the fibers. The work is slow and requires patience, but it is not difficult, and your fingers find their way through the knots almost on their own, as if they remember the pattern of the original coil. Little by little the rope straightens out, and you wind it back into a neat loop, tucking the end under the last turn to hold it in place. You hang the coil back on its peg, and now it looks the way it should, tidy and ready for use. The shelf above the bench holds a few other items that need attention. There is a small earthenware pot that once held tea, its inside stained dark brown from countless steepings, and beside it a wooden dipper with a crack in its bowl. You pick up the dipper and examine the crack, a thin line that runs from the rim down toward the center of the bowl, not yet leaking but likely to grow if it is left untreated. You find a small pot of pine resin, a sticky golden substance that you collect from the trees upslope and keep for mending wooden vessels. You warm the resin between your fingers until it softens, and then you press it into the crack, working it deep with your thumbnail until the line is filled. The resin will harden over the next few hours and seal the crack completely, and the dipper will be usable again. You set it aside on the bench to cure and make a mental note to check it later. The teapot is empty, its leaves long since discarded, but there is still the faint, pleasant smell of roasted barley inside. You pick it up and carry it to the water barrel that stands just outside the shed door, a large wooden cask that collects rainwater from a length of bamboo guttering attached to the shed roof. The barrel is nearly full, the water clear and cold, and you fill the teapot partway and swish the water around to rinse out the old leaves. You pour the rinse water onto the grass and fill the pot again, then set it on the small charcoal brazier that sits on a flat stone near the shed door. The brazier is cold now, but a few embers from this morning's fire still smoulder under a layer of ash in the farmhouse hearth, and you will bring some down later to heat the water. For now, you simply leave the pot there, ready for the afternoon. Back inside the shed, you turn your attention to the wooden sluice boards that lean against the wall in a stack of 3. These are spare boards, kept in case one of the gates in the paddies needs replacing, and they need to be checked periodically for rot or warping. You take them down one at a time and examine them in the light from the doorway. The wood is cedar, pale and straight-grained, and it is weathered to a soft silver grey. The first board is sound, its edges still square, its surface smooth. The second board has a small knot near the centre, but the knot is tight and does not go all the way through, so you judge it to be still usable. The third board has begun to cup slightly, curving across its width, and you set it aside on the bench to be planed flat later with the adze. The planing will take only a few minutes, but you are not in a hurry, and the board will keep until you are ready. You realize as you stand in the quiet dimness of the shed that you have been working for several hours without pause. The morning has passed, though you did not notice it passing, and now there is a different quality to the light outside, a slight softening that suggests the afternoon is well underway. Your body feels the work in a pleasant, diffuse way, a warmth in the muscles of your shoulders and back, a slight ache in your knees from all the kneeling and bending. You sit down again on the log stool and let yourself be still for a moment, listening to the sounds that filter through the shed walls, the steady rush of the drainage gate, the fainter murmur of the lateral channel, the occasional call of a bird from the forest edge. A small spider is building a web in the corner above the workbench, its movement slow and deliberate, each thread laid down with a precision that reminds you of the way you placed the stones in the terrace wall. You watch the spider for a while without really thinking about it, your mind drifting in the same slow, aimless way that the mist drifted over the paddies at dawn. After a time, you rise and begin to straighten the last few things in the shed. You brush the wood shavings from the bench into your palm and toss them out the door, where they will blow away or rot into the grass. You wipe the bench top with a damp rag, removing the dust and oil smears. You check that each tool is securely on its peg, that the rope coil is neat, that the oil bottle is stoppered, that the spare wedges are in their clay pot. The shed settles into order around you, every object in its place, and there is a quiet satisfaction in this, a sense of readiness. When you need a tool, it will be here, sharp and clean, and exactly where your hand expects to find it. You step out of the shed and lift the door plank back into its groove, sealing the dim interior away from the outside light. The sky is still overcast, but the clouds have thinned a little, and there is a patch of pale brightness where the sun is trying to break through. You stand for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the light, and you look out across the terraces. The water in the paddies gleams a soft silver grey, and the rice plants stand in their neat rows, their green blades stirring slightly in a breeze that has just begun to move. The upper wall, the lateral channel, the bunds you mended earlier in the morning, they all holding, all doing their quiet work, and the hillside feels whole again, put back into its proper shape. You pick up your hoe from where you leaned it against the shed wall, and you begin the walk back up toward the middle terrace, where there is still the settling earth to attend to, still the soft spots in the paddy that need to be filled. The afternoon stretches out ahead of you, calm and undemanding, and you move into it with the same slow, steady pace that has carried you through the whole long day. By the time you reach the middle terrace, the largest of the 3 paddies that step down the hillside, the morning has truly passed and the day has settled into its long, quiet middle. You can tell this not by the sun, which remains hidden behind a uniform layer of cloud, but by the quality of the light, which has lost the grey coolness of dawn and taken on a warmer, more diffuse brightness. The kind of light that seems to come from everywhere at once and casts no shadows. The air, too, has changed, growing a little heavier, a little closer, and there is a faint warmth rising from the wet earth now, a steam you can almost smell, though the ground underfoot is still soft and cool. You stand at the edge of the middle terrace, your hoe resting across your shoulder, and you look out across the broad sheet of water that fills this paddy from bund to bund. The middle terrace is different from the upper and lower ones. It is wider, for one thing, the generous rectangle that occupies a natural bench in the hillside where the slope flattens out for a short distance before dropping away again. Your grandfather, or perhaps his father before him, recognized this flat place as a gift and made the most of it, pushing the retaining walls out as far as they would go until the paddy was nearly twice the size of the one above it. The water here is shallower too, spreading out thin across the wide expanse, so that the rice plants seem to stand in only a finger's depth of water, their green shoots rising from a surface that is more like a mirror than a pond. The seedlings are spaced evenly, each one a small green fountain of narrow blades, and they march across the paddy in straight lines that converge toward the far end, a pattern so regular it might have been drawn with a ruler and string. You begin to walk the perimeter of the middle terrace, following the narrow bund that forms its boundary. The grass on the bund is wet and springy, and your straw sandals leave faint impressions that fill slowly with water after you pass. As you walk, you keep your eyes on the surface of the paddy, watching how the water moves, how the light reflects, where the silt has settled and where it still hangs suspended. The water is faintly cloudy, a pale brownish grey that tells you the storm washed a considerable amount of fine earth down from the slopes above, and that earth is now drifting slowly across the paddy, particle by particle, seeking out the low places where it can come to rest. This is the quiet work of a terrace after rain, the slow settling of disturbed soil back into a new arrangement, and your job now is simply to watch and to help it along where you can. The bond on the upper side of the middle terrace is in good condition, the grass thick and untorn, the earth beneath firm when you press it with your foot. You walk its length slowly, pausing every few steps to look out across the water, and you notice that the silt is not evenly distributed. In some places, the water is almost clear, the bottom of the paddy visible as a smooth brown floor. In others, there are faint streaks of cloudiness like smoke under water, where the current is carrying the suspended particles toward the drainage end. And in one place near the center of the paddy, there is a patch where the water seems slightly deeper than elsewhere, a subtle dimple in the surface that catches the light differently. You mark that spot in your mind and continue walking. The lower bund, the one that separates the middle terrace from the lateral channel you cleared earlier, is wetter underfoot, and here you find the first soft spots. When you step on a certain section, the ground gives slightly, and water wells up around the edges of your sandal, darkening the grass. You stop and press the spot with the flat of your hoe, and the blade sinks in more than it should, the earth beneath having been loosened by the rain and not yet compacted again. You work your way along the whole length of the lower bund, testing each step, and you find 3 such places in total, each one a small area no wider than your shoulders. The repairs are simple. You use the flat of the hoe to tamp down the loose earth, pounding it with short, firm strokes until the ground feels solid again underfoot. The tamping makes a wet, slapping sound, and water squeezes out around the edges with each stroke, running back into the paddy in thin rivulets. When you have finished, the bund is firm once more, and you continue your circuit. At the far end of the middle terrace, where the water flows out through a narrow gap in the bund and drops into the lateral channel, you stop to examine the outflow. The gap is framed by 2 flat stones set on edge, and the water passes between them in a smooth, silent sheet, so clear that you can see every detail of the stones beneath. There is no debris here, because the lateral channel you cleared earlier is now carrying everything away cleanly, and you feel a small satisfaction in seeing how the 2 pieces of work connect, how the clearing downstream allows the outflow here to run free. You kneel and dip your hand into the flow, feeling the cool water push against your fingers, and then you stand and turn back toward the center of the paddy. Now you wade out into the water. You leave your straw sandals on the bank because they would only grow heavy and sodden, and you step barefoot into the paddy. The water is cool but not cold, and the mud at the bottom is soft and silky, yielding under your feet with a gentle sucking give. The rice plants brush against your shins as you walk, their leaves smooth and cool, and you move slowly so as not to knock them over or disturb their roots. The water comes up only to your ankles, and each step sends out a small ring of ripples that spreads across the still surface and fades before it reaches the edges. You are wading toward the center of the paddy, toward the place where you notice the water looking slightly deeper, the subtle depression that has formed since the storm. When you reach the spot, you can feel it with your feet before you see it. The mud beneath you suddenly drops away just a little, and the water rises to mid-calf, colder here because it is deeper. You stop and look down, and through the cloudy water you can make out the vague shape of a low area, a shallow bowl in the paddy floor perhaps 3 paces across. The silt in the water has been settling into this bowl all morning, drawn by the gentle pull of gravity, and the bottom here is noticeably softer, the mud freshly deposited and not yet firm. This is the settling earth the storm brought, and if it is left here, it will create a permanent low spot where water will always pull deeper than it should, making the rice grow unevenly and complicating the drainage when the time comes to dry the paddy before harvest. The repair is not urgent, but it is necessary, and now is the time to do it, while the earth is still soft and easy to move. You wade back to the edge of the paddy and fetch the flat basket from where you left it on the bank. The basket is woven from split bamboo, wide and shallow, with a rope handle that fits over your shoulder. You also pick up the wooden shovel, its blade worn thin and curved from years of digging, and you carry both back out into the water. The filling of the depression will be a slow task, a matter of many small trips, because you cannot take too much earth from any one place without creating new low spots elsewhere. You begin at the upper edge of the paddy, where the bund is thick and built up from generations of accumulated soil. Here you can afford to take a little earth without weakening the structure, and you slide the shovel blade into the mud just below the waterline, cutting out a small load of dark, dense soil that drips heavily as you lift it into the basket. The first basketful is not heavy, but it is awkward to carry through the water, the basket bumping against your hip and sending small waves across the paddy surface. You make your way slowly back to the depression, the mud sucking at your feet with each step, and when you reach the low spot, you tip the basket and let the soil slide out. It falls into the water with a deep, liquid sound, a soft glug that sends up a cloud of brown silt. You watch the cloud spread and slowly settle, and then you turn and wade back to the edge for another load. The work settles into its rhythm. Walk to the bund, cut out a shovelful of earth, lift it into the basket, wade back to the depression, tip the basket, watch the soil settle, turn and repeat. The distances are short, no more than 20 paces each way, and the loads are small, and yet the work seems to fill the afternoon, each trip adding only a little to the low place, the depression filling so gradually that you cannot see the progress from one trip to the next. The mud is cool between your toes, and the rice leaves brush gently against your legs as you pass. You become aware of the many small lives that share the paddy with you. A water strider skating across the surface on its dimple feet, a tiny snail clinging to the stem of a rice plant, a frog that you surprise from its hiding place and that swims away in quick, panicked darts. The water is not silent either. There is a constant faint rustle, the sound of rice leaves stirring against each other in the light breeze, and the plink of insects landing on the surface, and the soft, rhythmic slosh of your own footsteps. These sounds are so quiet that you would not hear them from the bank, but here, wading slowly through the paddy, you are inside them, surrounded by the small, intimate noises of a living place. As you work, you think about the nature of terraces, the way they are never truly finished. A terrace is not a monument, not a thing you build once and then leave alone. It is a relationship, a constant negotiation between earth and water and the hands that tend them. Every rain changes something, every dry spell opens new cracks, every season brings a new set of small adjustments. Your father understood this, and his father before him, and someday, if the terraces are to survive, someone else will understand it after you. The work you are doing now, carrying baskets of mud to fill a shallow depression, is the same work that has been done on this hillside for generations, and it is the same work that will be done for generations more. There is no frustration in this, no sense of futility, only a quiet acceptance of the way things are, a recognition that the land is always shifting and always needs attention, and that giving it that attention is a good and peaceful way to spend a day. The clouds begin to thicken overhead as you work, the pale brightness of midday giving way to a deeper, more uniform grey. You can feel the change in the air, a slight drop in temperature, a faint increase in the humidity, and you know that more rain is coming. It is not a threat, not something to hurry against, just another part of the pattern, another turn in the slow cycle of wet and dry. You continue your trips back and forth across the paddy, and after a time you notice that the depression is nearly filled. The water depth there is now the same as the rest of the paddy. Your feet no longer sink into a hidden hollow, and the surface of the water, when you step back and look, is flat and even from edge to edge. You take a few more loads for good measure, mounding the fresh earth just slightly above the surrounding level, because you know it will settle and compact over the next few days, and will end up flush if you give it a little extra to start with. You carry the basket and shovel back to the bank and leave them there, then wade out into the center of the paddy one last time to check your work. You walk slowly across the filled area, feeling the ground with your bare feet, and it is firm and level, no different from the rest of the paddy floor. The water is still cloudy from all your stirring, a pale brown that will take a few hours to clear, but the silt is already beginning to settle out again, the particles drifting down through the still water to find their new resting places. By tomorrow morning, the paddy will be clear and flat and ready for whatever comes next. As you stand there in the middle of the paddy, the first drops of the new shower begin to fall. They are light and sparse, just a few scattered circles on the water surface, dimpling the grey mirror with small rings that spread and overlap and disappear. You look up and feel the cool drops on your face, and you decide that you have done enough for now, that the middle terrace is as ready as you can make it. You wade slowly back to the bank, your bare feet squelching in the mud, and you sit down on a flat stone at the edge of the paddy to put your sandals back on. The rain is still light, a fine drizzle that patters softly on the wide brim of your hat and on the leaves of the rice plants, a sound like someone brushing silk with their fingertips. The clouds have settled lower over the valley, and the far hillsides are beginning to blur again, their green terraces fading into the grey of the rain. You sit for a moment longer, letting the drizzle wash the mud from your feet and legs, and then you stand and gather your tools, ready to move on to whatever the afternoon still holds. The rain returns not as a storm, but as a long, steady whisper, a fine drizzle that begins while you are still sitting on the flat stone at the edge of the middle terrace, letting the mud dry on your feet. At first there are only a few drops, separate and distinct, each one making a small circle on the grey water and a tiny tapping sound on the brim of your hat. Then the drops come more quickly, merging into a continuous fall, a soft hiss that rises from the grass and the paddy surface and the broad leaves of the wild yams growing along the bank. The clouds have settled down over the valley like a heavy grey blanket, and the far hillsides have disappeared entirely, swallowed up in a blur of rain and mist that makes the world seem smaller and closer and quieter than it was before. You sit for a moment longer, feeling the coolness of the rain on your hands and the back of your neck, and then you rise and walk up to the shed to fetch your rain cape, because the afternoon is going to be wet and there is still work to do. The rain cape hangs on a wooden peg just inside the shed door, a broad mantle woven from rice straw in a tight layered pattern that sheds water like the thatch of a roof. It is stiff and rustling when you first put it on, the straw fibers crackling softly as they settle across your shoulders, and it smells of dry grass and old rain and the faint dusty scent of the shed itself. The wide hat that goes with it is made from split bamboo and layers of straw, its brim broad enough to keep the rain from your face, and you tie its chin cord with a simple knot that your fingers know without thinking. Dressed in this way, you feel slightly removed from the world, the rain pattering on the cape and the hat with a sound that is both close and distant, a steady background rhythm that will accompany every movement you make for the rest of the afternoon. You step back out into the drizzle, and the rain darkens the straw of your cape almost immediately, turning it from pale gold to a deep, wet brown. Your movements are slower now, more deliberate, as if the rain has added a gentle weight to everything. You walk up the path toward the upper terrace, where the main irrigation ditch enters the paddy system through a bamboo gate, and you notice how the rain changes the familiar landscape. The stones on the path are slick and dark, Their colors deepen to charcoal and moss green, and the puddles in the low places have grown larger, their surfaces shivering under the falling drops. The grass on either side of the path is bent double under the weight of water, and when you brush against it, a shower of cold droplets falls onto your legs. The sound of the rain is everywhere, a constant shushing that blends with the gurgle of the ditches and the distant rush of the drainage gate, until it is impossible to tell one water sound from another. You walk through it all without hurry, your straw sandals squelching softly, and you feel the afternoon settle around you like a second cape, heavy and still. The bamboo gate is a simple structure, a frame of thick bamboo poles lashed together with rice straw rope, set across the point where the main stream from the forest enters the upper terrace. Its purpose is to control the flow and to catch the larger debris before it can wash into the paddy, and it has been here in one form or another since the terraces were first built. The rain has swollen the stream, and the water pours through the gate with a deep, throaty rush, white foam piling up against the bamboo bars. You kneel beside the gate on the wet grass, feeling the cold soak through the knees of your trousers, and you examine the bindings that hold the frame together. The ropes are old, their fibers softened and darkened by water, and some of them have begun to fray. One in particular, the rope that lashes the main crossbar to the upright post, has worked loose, its knot slipping, and the crossbar now wobbles slightly in the current. If it is not tightened, the whole gate could shift, and the flow into the paddy would become uneven. You untie the loose knot with patient fingers, the wet rope cold and rough against your skin, and you work the strands apart carefully so as not to break them. The rope is made from rice straw, twisted into a two-ply cord, and even though it is old, it is still strong enough if it is retied properly. You pull the crossbar back into its correct position, bracing your knee against the upright post, and you begin to rewind the rope around the joint. The motion is a familiar one. Pass the rope around, cross it over itself, pull it tight, pass it around again. The rain patters on your hat and on your hands, and the water from the stream splashes up against your wrists, but you work steadily, each wrap of the rope neat and snug against the one before it. When you have made enough turns, you finish with a secure knot, a double loop that pulls tight against itself and will not slip. You test the crossbar with your hand, pushing it and pulling it, and it holds firm. The other bindings seem sound, though you take a moment to check each one, running your fingers over the ropes to feel for any weakness, any place where the strands are parting. They are all still holding, and you are satisfied. You stand and stretch your back, the rain cape rustling with the movement, and you look out across the upper terrace. The paddy is a sheet of shifting grey under the rain, its surface broken everywhere by the falling drops, each one a tiny splash that vanishes as soon as it forms. The rice plants seem darker green now, their leaves heavy with water, and they stand perfectly still, as if they are waiting. The inflow from the gate spreads out in a fan of ripples that dissipates into the larger stillness of the paddy, and you can see that the water is moving cleanly, no debris, no blockage. The gate is doing its work, and you leave it there in the rain and turn your attention to the stones at the intake. The intake is a narrow notch in the upper bund, lined on both sides with flat stones that channel the water from the stream into the paddy. These stones are set into the earth at precise angles, and after a heavy rain they sometimes shift, pushed out of alignment by the force of the water or by the small stones and gravel that tumble down the stream bed. You walk along the edge of the bund to the intake, your feet slipping slightly on the wet grass, and you crouch to examine the stones. The one on the left side has moved, just a little, its top edge now tilted outward, so that a thin sheet of water escapes over its side, rather than flowing straight into the notch. It is a small thing, but small things have a way of growing larger if left unattended, and so you reach down into the cold stream water and grip the stone with both hands. It is heavy, its surface slick with algae, and you have to work your fingers under its edges to get a good hold. You lift it slightly, feeling the water push against your arms, and you shift it back into its proper position, nudging it with your thumbs until it sits flush against its neighbor. Then you pack a handful of wet clay from the bank around its base, pressing the clay down firmly with your knuckles, sealing the gap where the water was escaping. The stream flows cleanly through the notch once more, and the errant sheet of water is gone. You rinse your hands in the stream and stand up, the rain running in rivulets down the straw of your cape. The next task takes you to the wooden sluice board that controls the outflow from the upper terrace to the middle one. This board is a wide plank of cedar that slides up and down in a grooved frame, and it has been in place for several seasons now, its surface weathered to a soft silver grey. The rain has made the wood swell, and the board has become sticky in its grooves, difficult to move. You kneel beside it and try to lift it, and it resists, the wet wood binding against the frame with a gritty, scraping sound. You take out a small hand adze from the pouch at your waist, the same one you used earlier for trimming, and you begin to scrape the moss and the thin layer of algae that has grown along the edges of the board. The moss is dark green and slippery, and it comes away in wet fibrous curls under the blade, revealing the pale clean wood beneath. You work slowly, scraping one edge and then the other, and you test the board frequently, lifting it a little and letting it drop, until it slides freely in its grooves with only a soft woody thud. When you are satisfied, you slide the board back down to its proper height, and the water behind it laps against the wood with a quiet, contented sound. You walk down to the lower end of the middle terrace, where a length of bamboo piping carries water from the lateral channel under the bund and into the drainage system. The piping is made from a single thick culm of bamboo, its internal nodes knocked out so that the water can flow through, and it has been buried just beneath the surface of the bund. Over time, the bamboo can split, especially after a cold winter or a heavy storm, and today, as you approach, you can hear a telltale hissing sound that is different from the ordinary rush of the water. You kneel in the wet grass and find the place where a fine spray of water is jetting upward through a crack in the bamboo, a crack no wider than a blade of grass but long enough to weaken the pipe. The spray is cold against your face, and you put your hand over the crack to feel the pressure of the water, a steady, insistent push. You will need to replace this section of piping. You leave the leak and walk back to the small bamboo grove that grows at the edge of the forest, where you keep a supply of cut culms seasoning under a pile of straw. The rain drips from the bamboo leaves overhead, heavy drops that fall with a soft thump on your hat, and the grove is dim and green and smells of wet earth and the clean, sharp scent of living bamboo. You select a culm that is about the thickness of your wrist, its surface a smooth pale green with the faint white bloom that new bamboo always carries. You carry it back to the shed where your knife waits, and you sit on the log stool just inside the doorway, out of the heaviest rain. The knife is a simple one, a straight blade set in a wooden handle, and it is sharp enough to shave the hair from your arm. You cut the bamboo culm to the right length first, measuring it against the damaged section you will remove, and then you split the culm lengthwise with a few practice strokes, the blade following the straight grain easily. The bamboo splits with a sharp, clean crack, and you work the two halves apart, revealing the pale, dry interior with its thin, papery membranes where the nodes once were. You trim the edges with a knife, shaving away any splinters until you have a smooth, even trough that will carry the water without catching debris. The work is quiet and satisfying, the knife making a soft whispering sound as it cuts, and the rain pattering on the thatch overhead is a steady, soothing accompaniment. You carry the new length of bamboo piping back to the lateral channel and set it on the grass. Then you dig out the damaged section with your hands, the wet earth cold and heavy, releasing a gush of water that pours over your fingers and splashes into the channel below. You lift out the cracked culm, its split now gaping, and you set it aside on the bank. It will dry out and be useful as kindling later. The new piping slides into place easily, and you pack earth around it carefully, pressing the soil down with your knuckles and your palms until the pipe is buried and only the open end protrudes from the bund. The water flows through it smoothly, with no hiss, no spray, and the channel below receives it with a quiet gurgle. You rinse the mud from your hands in the flow and stand up, the rain still falling gently all around you. You pause then, in the middle of the afternoon, and you become aware of a great stillness that lies beneath the sound of the rain. The world has gone soft and blurred at the edges, the colours muted to greys and greens and the deep brown of wet wood, and the rain itself has become a kind of silence, a steady, all-encompassing hush that seems to slow everything down. You walk to the edge of the lower terrace and look across the paddy, and there, standing motionless in the shallows near the drainage gate, is a heron. It is a tall grey bird, its feathers the exact colour of the rain and the mist, and it stands on one leg, its neck curved into a graceful S, its long beak pointing down at the water. It is perfectly still, so still that it might be a carving, and you stop walking so as not to disturb it. The rain falls on the heron's back and beads on its feathers and rolls off without soaking in, and the bird does not seem to notice the rain at all. It is waiting, you know, for a small fish or a frog to come within range, and it will wait for as long as it needs to, patient in a way that makes your own patience seem hurried. You stand and watch the heron for a long time, the rain dripping from the brim of your hat, and you feel the quiet of the afternoon settle deeper into your bones. There is no need to rush, no need to move on to the next task before you are ready. The heron does not rush, the rain does not rush, the terraces do not rush. Everything is moving at its own slow pace, and you are part of that pace, your heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of the falling water. The heron's head moves, just slightly, a tiny adjustment of angle, and then it strikes, its beak darting into the water with a speed that seems impossible from a creature so still. It comes up with a small silver fish, which it swallows in a single motion, and then it resumes its stillness, as if nothing had happened. You watch for a while longer, and then you turn away, leaving the heron to its fishing, and you walk slowly back toward the shed, your feet finding their own way along the wet path. The afternoon stretches out in a sequence of these quiet mends, each one small and undemanding, each one blurring into the next, like the rain blurring the distant hills. You tighten a loose peg on the sluice gate frame, tapping it home with a stone. You straighten a row of rice seedlings that the storm had pushed slightly askew, working with your hands in the cold water, setting each plant gently back into the mud. You clear a small blockage of wet leaves from the secondary drainage slot, pulling them out one by one and letting them drop into the current. You coil a length of spare rope and hang it in the shed, and you wipe down the blade of the hoe with an oily rag, and you check the sharpness of the sickle by testing it on a strand of grass. These are tasks so small that they barely register, and yet they fill the time, each one a quiet, deliberate action that requires nothing more than your attention and your hands. The light never really changes. The clouds remain thick and unbroken, and the rain falls steadily, and the sky stays a uniform pearl grey that makes it impossible to tell whether it is mid-afternoon or approaching evening. You lose track of the hour, and you do not mind losing it. The day has become a single long, slow moment, a suspension between the morning's repairs and the evening's rest, and you move through it with the same calm, unhurried pace that you might use to walk through a dream. The rain is a constant on your cape and your hat, and after a while you stop noticing it entirely, just as you stop noticing the sound of your own breathing. It has become part of you, or you have become part of it, and the boundary between yourself and the wet green world has grown thin and indistinct. Eventually, you find yourself standing by the tool shed, looking out across the terraces one last time before dusk. The rain is still falling, but it seems lighter now, a fine mist rather than a drizzle, and the clouds have lifted just enough that you can see the dark line of the forest at the top of the slope and the pale ribbon of the stream descending through its ravine. The paddies gleam softly in the grey light, their surfaces rippled and alive, and you can see the places where you worked, though they are already beginning to disappear into the general wetness of the afternoon. The heron is gone from the lower paddy, flown off to some other fishing ground, and the only movement is the slow drift of water from one level to the next, a movement so constant and so quiet that it seems like the breathing of the hillside itself. You stand there for a while, not thinking, not planning, just breathing the cool, wet air and letting the rain fall on your shoulders. And then you turn and walk toward the shed to put away your tools, the afternoon of small tasks complete, the day moving gently toward its close. The lower terrace is the last of the 3 paddies, the final level before the hillside drops away into the natural stream bed that runs along the valley floor. It is the smallest of the terraces, a narrow crescent of water that follows the curve of the slope, and it is the deepest, the water here coming nearly to your knees in the center. This is where everything eventually flows, every drop of rain that falls on the upper paddies, every particle of silt that washes through the lateral channels, every stray leaf and twig and floating seed. The lower terrace is the collector, the quiet basin where the hillside's water gathers before it is released through the drainage gate and sent on its way down to the stream below. And because it is the collector, it requires a different kind of attention, a watchfulness that is less about mending and more about managing, about making sure the outflow is steady and the level is right, and nothing is building up where it should not be. You stand at the upper edge of the lower terrace, looking down across its surface. The rain has lessened to a fine, drifting mist, barely more than a dampness in the air, and the water in the paddy is dark and still, its surface smooth except where the drainage gate at the far end pulls a slow, invisible current toward the outlet. The rice plants here are a little taller than those in the upper paddies, their stems thicker, their leaves broader, because they have had the benefit of the deeper water and the richer silt that settles out in this lowest basin. They stand in neat rows, their green blades dark and glossy, and they barely stir in the faint breeze that moves across the valley. You step down onto the narrow bund that borders the terrace and begin to walk its perimeter, your eyes moving slowly across the water, looking for anything out of place. The bund on the lower side, the side that faces the valley, is built higher and thicker than the others because it must hold back the full weight of all the water in the terrace system. It is a substantial wall of earth faced with stone, its base planted with a tough, deep-rooted grass that holds the soil together, and you can feel its solidity under your feet as you walk. The stones on the outer face are large and heavy, some of them as big as your chest, and they were placed here by your great-grandfather, who understood that the lowest wall bears the greatest burden and must be the strongest. You run your hand over the stones as you walk, feeling their familiar roughness, their cool, wet surfaces, the moss that has grown in the crevices over the decades. They are all holding firm, no cracks, no bulges, no signs of shifting. The rain has not tested this wall the way it tested the upper one, and you are grateful for that. At the far end of the lower terrace, where the bund curves around to meet the hillside, the drainage gate stands dark against the grey water. It is a simple structure, a frame of heavy cedar planks set into the bund, with a sliding stopboard that can be raised or lowered to control how much water leaves the terrace. The gate is old, its wood dark with water and age, and it has been repaired many times, so that now it is a patchwork of original planks and newer replacements, the old wood nearly black, the new wood still pale and resinous. The water that passes through the gate does not fall in a single dramatic cascade, but spills out in a smooth, steady sheet, sliding down a stone apron into a pool below, where it then flows off into the natural stream that winds its way down through the valley. The sound the gate makes is a low, constant rush, deeper in pitch than the higher, brighter sounds of the upper channels, and it has been the background note of your entire day, the deep bass beneath all the other water music of the hillside. You approach the gate and kneel beside it, setting your hoe down on the grass. Up close, you can see that the stopboard has been pushed slightly askew, one corner riding higher than the other, so that the sheet of water pouring over it is thinner on one side and thicker on the other. This is not surprising. The volume of water that passed through the gate during the night storm must have been considerable, and the pressure against the board would have been strong enough to shift it in its grooves. You grip the board by its top edge and try to lift it, but it is wedged tight, the wood swollen by the rain and jammed against the sides of the frame. You rock it gently back and forth and it loosens with a wet, sucking sound, the water rushing more freely through the widened gap as you raise it. You set the board aside on the bank, and the paddy water pours through the opening with a sudden, joyful gush, its voice louder and higher, and the level in the terrace begins to drop just a little, just enough to relieve some of the pressure on the bund. With the stopboard removed, you can examine the gate frame more closely. The grooves that the board slides in are cut into two upright cedar posts, and over time those grooves have become worn and uneven, the wood softening and fraying at the edges. One groove in particular, the one on the left side, has a rough patch where the grain has lifted, and you can see how the stopboard was catching on that roughness, preventing it from seating properly. You reach into the groove with your fingers, feeling the raised fibers, and you decide to smooth them down before you put the board back. You walk to the shed to fetch the small hand adze, and when you return, you kneel beside the gate and begin to plane the rough patch carefully, drawing the adze blade along the wood with light, controlled strokes. The adze is sharp, and it peels away thin curls of wet cedar, each one pale and fragrant, until the groove is smooth and even. You test it with your thumb, running it along the wood, and it feels clean and regular, no longer catching. But the board itself also needs attention. You pick it up from the grass and examine it in the grey light. It is a wide plank, its bottom edge beveled so that it seats firmly in the groove, and that beveled edge has become uneven over time, worn down more on one side than the other. This is why the board was riding askew, why the water was pouring over it unevenly. You carry the board back to the shed and set it on the workbench, and you take up the adze again. The work is slow and careful, because you must remove only a little material, just enough to restore the even bevel, without making the board too short. You sight along the edge frequently, closing one eye and looking for the high spots, and then you shave them down, stroke by stroke, until the bevel runs true from one end to the other. The wood is wet and cuts easily, and the adze leaves a smooth, clean surface that will seat snugly in the groove. You carry the board back to the gate and slide it into the frame. It drops smoothly into the grooves now with no catching, no resistance, and it settles onto the stone sill with a solid, satisfying thump. The water immediately begins to back up behind it, the level in the terrace rising again, and you adjust the board to its proper height, setting it so that the paddy is neither too full nor too empty, so that the rice plants are standing in just the right depth. The sheet of water that spills over the top is even now, a smooth, glassy curve that catches the grey light, and the sound it makes as it falls onto the apron is a steady, even rush, no longer ragged or uneven. You step back and watch it for a moment, and the gate is working properly again, doing exactly what it was built to do. But the water below the gate needs attention too. The stone apron that catches the outflow is partly buried under a layer of leaves and small branches that have washed over the gate during the storm and lodged in the crevices between the stones. You climb down the bank carefully, your sandals slipping on the wet grass, and you wade into the shallow pool at the base of the apron. The water here is cold and clear, and it swirls around your ankles, and the stones underfoot are round and smooth from centuries of water flowing over them. You begin to clear the debris by hand, pulling out wet leaves and tossing them onto the bank, lifting the smaller branches and setting them aside to dry. The leaves are mostly oak and maple, their colors already fading to a uniform brown, and they have packed themselves into the gaps between the stones so tightly that you have to pry them out with your fingers. Underneath them, the stones are slick with a thin film of algae, dark green and slippery, and you scrub some of it away with a handful of grass so that the water can flow more freely. A few small fish dart away from your hands as you work, silver flashes in the dark water. They are the young of the Yayu, the sweet river fish that swim up from the lowlands in the spring, and they have found their way into the terrace system through the stream below, and have made a home in the quiet pool beneath the gate. You watch them for a moment, their quick, nervous movements, their translucent fins catching the light, and then you leave them in peace and continue clearing the apron. When the stones are clean and the water flows freely over them, you climb back up the bank and stand beside the gate, looking down at your work. The pool is clear and still, and the water from the gate falls into it with a clean, musical sound, and the small fish are already returning, their silver bodies glinting as they investigate the newly cleared spaces between the stones. The drainage gate is the main outflow, but there is also a secondary drain, a narrow slot cut into the bund on the opposite side of the lower terrace, and you walk around the paddy to check it. This secondary drain is a safety measure designed to carry away excess water if the main gate becomes blocked or overwhelmed and it has not been used in several seasons. The slot is overgrown with grass, and a mat of water weeds has grown across its opening, their long green tendrils waving in the slow current. You kneel and pull the weeds away, their roots coming up with a soft ripping sound, and you toss them onto the bank. Underneath, the slot is clear, the stones on either side still solid, and the water begins to trickle through it, a thin stream that joins the main outflow below. It is a small thing, barely worth doing, but now it is done, and the secondary drain is ready if it is ever needed. You walk back to the main gate and stand there for a while, one hand resting on the weathered cedar of the frame, looking out across the lower terrace. The paddy is refilled to its proper level, the water smooth and dark under the grey sky, and the rice plants stand in their quiet rows, their green blades perfectly still. The sound of the gate is a low, constant music, and the whole terrace seems to breathe with it, a slow, steady rhythm of inflow and outflow that has been going on since the first water was diverted from the stream so many generations ago. You can feel the weight of all that water behind the bund, the quiet pressure of it, but you can also feel the strength of the wall holding it back, the stones and the earth and the roots of the grass all working together. It is a balance, a moment of equilibrium between the force of the water and the resistance of the land, and you have helped to maintain that balance, just as your father did, just as his father did before him. You think, as you stand there, about the water's journey. It falls as rain on the forest upslope, seeps into the soil, gathers in the small streams that trickle down through the cedar roots, and eventually finds its way into the main irrigation ditch that feeds the upper terrace. From there it flows across the upper paddy, then through the middle, then into this lower basin, and finally through the drainage gate and into the natural stream bed, where it joins the larger stream that runs down through the valley to the river on the plain below. That river will carry it to the sea, and from the sea it will rise again as cloud and fall again as rain on the forest, and the cycle will continue, endless and unhurried. You are only a small part of that cycle, a pair of hands that adjust the gates and mend the walls, but it is enough. It is more than enough. The mist has thickened again while you were working, the clouds lowering over the valley, and the light has begun to change in a way that suggests the afternoon is moving toward evening. There is a faint dimming in the grey, a slight softening of what little brightness remains, and the air has grown cooler, the dampness settling more heavily on your skin. You turn from the gate and walk back along the bund to the upper end of the lower terrace, where your hoe and basket wait. You gather them up, and you take one last look at the paddy, its surface still and grey, the drainage gate murmuring its low, steady note, the small fish swimming in the pool below. Everything is in its place, everything is holding, and the lower terrace is settled and calm. You begin the walk back up toward the shed, your tools in hand, and the evening waits for you somewhere just ahead, quiet and patient, ready to receive you when the last of the day's work is done. The rain stops sometime in the late afternoon, though you do not notice the exact moment it ends, only that the steady patter on your hat and cape has gradually faded into silence, and when you look up, the clouds are beginning to break apart. To the west, beyond the dark ridge of the forest, the grey ceiling has torn open in long, ragged strips, and through those strips a pale orange light is spilling, the colour of a dying ember, catching the undersides of the remaining clouds and turning them to rose and gold. The light is soft and low, the light of approaching dusk, and it falls slantwise across the valley, touching the wet terraces with a brief, fleeting warmth. You stop on the path between the lower paddy and the shed, your hoe and basket in your hands, and you watch the sky for a moment, the slow, silent drama of the clouds pulling apart, and the first faint hint of blue appearing behind them. The air has cooled noticeably, and the wet earth is beginning to steam faintly in the last of the daylight, a thin, ground-level mist that drifts across the grass like breath. You carry your tools to the shed and set them down outside the door, leaning the hoe against the wall and placing the basket upside down on a flat stone to drain. Then you go back up the path to collect the other tools you have used during the day, the shovel from where you left it by the upper wall, the tamping bar from its spot near the middle terrace steps, the adze and the chisel from the bench where you last set them down. You gather them one by one, cradling them in your arms, and you carry them down to the shed in a single load, the metal clinking softly with each step. The tools are wet and muddy, their blades darkened with soil and water, and they need to be cleaned and sharpened before they can be put away. This is the evening ritual, as old and as regular as the morning walk up to the paddies, and you settle into it with the same quiet, unhurried attention. Behind the shed, a small stream emerges from a cleft in the hillside, a spring that runs all year round, its water cold and clear and tasting faintly of the granite deep under the mountain. Beside the stream, a large flat stone has been set into the bank, a broad slab of grey schist with a shallow depression worn into its centre by generations of blades being pushed across its surface. This is the sharpening stone, and it sits just above the waterline so that you can kneel on the grass beside it and dip your hands into the stream without stretching. The grass here is thick and soft, and it is already wet with the rain and the spray from the stream, and when you kneel on it, you feel the cold dampness soak through the knees of your trousers. The stream makes a cheerful bubbling sound, a light music that is different from the deeper voice of the drainage gate, and you let that sound fill your ears as you arrange the tools on the grass beside you, the hoe, the sickle, the adze, the chisel, and the shovel, each one waiting its turn. You begin with the hoe, because it is the tool you used most today, its blade caked with mud from the lateral channel and the middle terrace depression. You dip the blade into the stream and use a handful of wet grass to scrub away the mud, working the grass into the corners where the blade meets the handle, loosening the soil that has dried and crusted there. The water runs brown for a moment, then clears, and the blade emerges clean and grey, its edge visible now as a thin, bright line. You set the hoe across the sharpening stone, its blade flat against the worn depression, and you pour a little water onto the stone from your cupped hand. Then you begin to push the blade across the stone, a steady, rhythmic motion, push forward with a slight downward pressure, lift at the end of the stroke, bring the blade back, push forward again. The stone is fine-grained and smooth, and the metal slides across it with a soft singing sound, a high, thin note that rises and falls with each stroke. A fine grey paste forms on the stone, a mixture of water and tiny particles of metal and stone dust, and you pause occasionally to splash more water onto the surface, washing the paste away so that the stone remains clean and cutting. The motion is old, older than you, older than your father, a motion that has been repeated on this same stone for as long as the terraces have existed. There is no thinking required. Your hands know how to hold the blade at the correct angle, how much pressure to apply, how many strokes are enough. Your mind drifts as you work, carried along by the rhythm, and you find yourself listening to the evening sounds, the stream bubbling beside you, the distant rush of the drainage gate, the first tentative calls of the evening insects, a frog beginning its low, throaty song somewhere down in the lower paddy. The light continues to change, the orange strips in the west fading now to a paler yellow, and the shadows under the trees are deepening, gathering in pools of blue-grey darkness. You test the hoe blade with your thumb, drawing it lightly across the edge, feeling for the slight catch that tells you the metal is sharp. The edge bites gently into the ridges of your thumbprint. Not enough to cut, but enough to let you know it is there. Satisfied, you dip the blade into the stream to rinse off the last of the paste, and then you dry it with a soft rag made from an old cotton cloth, wiping the metal carefully, making sure no moisture remains that could turn to rust overnight. You set the hoe aside on the grass, its blade gleaming dull grey in the twilight, and you reach for the next tool. The sickle is next, its curved blade dark with the same thin film of rust you noticed earlier in the shed, a rust that the day's damp air has already begun to renew despite your earlier oiling. You dip the blade into the stream and wipe it clean with the rag, and then you set it against the sharpening stone. The curve of the sickle requires a different motion from the straight blade of the hoe, a shorter, more controlled stroke that follows the arc of the metal. You hold the wooden handle in your right hand and guide the blade with your left, drawing it across the stone in a series of small overlapping arcs, each one covering a section of the edge. The sickle sings a slightly different note, higher and thinner, and the sound it makes is almost musical, a faint metallic whine that wavers as you change the angle. You work your way around the whole curve of the blade, from the thick base near the handle all the way to the narrow tip, and you test the edge frequently, feeling for any dull spots that might need extra attention. The tip is the hardest part to sharpen, because it is so narrow and so curved that only a small section of the stone can touch it at any one time, and you take your time there, making many small, careful strokes until the tip is as sharp as the rest. When the sickle is done, you rinse it and dry it, and you set it beside the hoe. The adze is next, its short, curved blade quite different from the long edge of the hoe or the sickle. The adze is sharpened on only one side, like a chisel, and the bevel is steep and short. You hold it with both hands, the wooden handle firm in your grip, and you draw the bevel across the stone with short, precise strokes, keeping the angle constant so that the edge remains true. The adze is the tool you use to trim the sluice board and to shave down the stop board of the drainage gate, and its edge is still relatively sharp, needing only a light touch-up rather than a full sharpening. You make a dozen strokes, perhaps a few more, and then you test it with your thumb. The edge is keen and clean, and you rinse the blade and dry it and set it with the others. The chisel is the smallest of the tools, a simple iron blade set in a short wooden handle used for fine work on the bamboo gates and the wooden sluice frames. Its edge is narrow, no wider than your thumbnail, and it requires the most delicate touch. You hold it almost vertically against the stone, tilting it just slightly to match the bevel angle, and you make tiny, careful strokes, rotating the blade after each one so that the edge wears evenly. The chisel makes a very faint sound, more of a whisper than a song, and you lean close to the stone to watch the edge as you work, making sure the bevel is flat and the corner is square. When it is sharp, you test it on a blade of grass, slicing through the green stem with a clean, effortless cut. Satisfied, you rinse and dry the chisel and place it with a growing row of clean, sharp tools. The shovel is the last tool, its broad, flat blade used for digging and carrying and tamping. The shovel is not meant to be razor sharp like the sickle, but its edge still needs to be kept clean and straight so that it cuts into the earth easily rather than bouncing off roots and stones. You hold the shovel with both hands and draw its edge across the stone in long sweeping strokes, working from one side of the blade to the other. The shovel is heavy, and the work makes your shoulders ache pleasantly, a reminder of the day's labor. You do not sharpen it to a fine edge, just enough to remove the small nicks and dents that have accumulated, and then you rinse it and dry it and set it with the rest. The sharpening is finished. You sit back on your heels and look at the row of tools on the grass beside you, their blades all clean and bright, their edges renewed. The light has faded further while you worked, the orange strips in the west now gone entirely, replaced by a pale luminous grey that is the last colour of the sky before true dusk. The stream beside you continues its quiet bubbling, and the air is cool and still, and smells of wet grass and clean metal, and the faint, earthy scent of the sharpening stone itself. You take the rag and wipe down the wooden handles of each tool, removing any mud or moisture, and then you gather them all in your arms and carry them into the shed. Inside the shed, it is dim now, the only light coming through the open doorway and the thin gaps between the wall planks, a soft, diffuse grey that barely illuminates the interior. The shadows have gathered in the corners, deep and soft, and the air inside is cool and smells of earth and oil and old straw. You hang each tool in its proper place, working by touch as much as by sight. The hoe goes on its peg on the left wall, its handle fitting into the groove worn by years of hanging. The sickle goes on its peg beside it, the curved blade facing inward, so that no one will brush against it by accident. The adze goes on its hook near the workbench, its sharp edge protected by a small leather sheath that you slide over the blade. The chisel goes into the clay pot on the shelf, its handle sticking up among the other small tools. The shovel goes into the corner beside the door, its blade resting on the packed earth floor. The tamping bar goes onto its two pegs, its weight settling with a solid thunk. The basket goes upside down on the shelf, and the spare rope goes on its peg, and the oil bottle is stoppered and placed back in its spot, and the rags are hung over the edge of the bench to dry. You move slowly around the shed, straightening and tidying, putting everything back into the order that will greet you in the morning. There is a quiet pleasure in this, a satisfaction that is not loud or sharp, but soft and deep, the feeling of a thing completed, a circle closed. The shed settles into stillness around you, and you stand for a moment in the center of the dim space, listening to the small sounds of evening, the creak of a board cooling, the distant rush of the drainage gate, the fainter, closer trickle of the spring behind the shed. Your body feels the day's work in a deep, pleasant tiredness that is not yet sleepiness, but a kind of heaviness, a sense of having used your muscles well and fully. You step outside the shed and stand for a moment, looking out across the terraces. The twilight has come, and the world has turned to shades of blue and grey. The paddies gleam faintly, their surfaces perfectly still now that the rain has stopped and the wind has died away, each one a dark mirror that catches the last pale light of the sky. You can see the upper terrace, its water a smooth grey sheet, and the middle terrace below it, and the lower terrace curving away into the shadow of the valley. The rice plants are dark silhouettes against the water, their rows straight and even, and they stand so still that they might be painted onto the dusk. The upper wall, which you repaired this morning, is already invisible in the gathering darkness, just another shadow among shadows, and the lateral channel is a faint silver line that disappears into the gloom. A fog is beginning to creep up from the valley floor, a thin white mist that rises slowly, silently, pooling in the low places, and then spreading outward like water overflowing a basin. It moves with a strange, deliberate grace, curling around the trunks of the cedar trees and drifting across the lower paddy until the water and the mist become one and the same, a single pale presence that obscures the boundary between earth and air. The fog does not rise high, only to the level of the middle terrace, and the upper paddy remains clear, its water still catching the sky. You watch the fog for a while, its slow hypnotic movement, and you feel the cool dampness of it on your face, the way it softens every sound, muffling the stream and the drainage gate, until they seem to come from very far away. The only sound that remains clear is the drainage gate itself, its low, steady trickle rising from the darkness at the bottom of the terraces. It is a sound that has been there all day in the background of every task, and now it emerges into the quiet of the evening as the dominant voice, a continuous, gentle note that will keep on through the night. The gate does not close, does not sleep, and as long as there is water in the paddies, it will continue its quiet outflow, dropping from the lower terrace into the stone pool and then down into the stream, a sound as constant and as comforting as breathing. You stand there listening to it, and you feel the day slowly letting go of you, the small tensions and the tensions of the work fading away into the mist and the dusk. The fog thickens, and the sky darkens from pale grey to deep charcoal, and the first stars are beginning to appear through the thinning clouds overhead, faint pinpricks of light that seem very far away. You take one last look at the terraces, at the water that gleams so faintly now it is almost invisible, and then you turn away from the shed and begin the slow walk back along the path to the farmhouse. The day is over, the tools are sharp and put away, and the terraces are holding their water steadily in the dark. Behind you, the drainage gate continues its quiet song, and the fog continues its slow climb up from the valley, and the hillside settles into the long, still hours of the night, waiting for the morning when it will all begin again. The path from the tool shed to the farmhouse is a familiar track that your feet know so well they could follow it in complete darkness, and indeed tonight they almost must, because the twilight has deepened into a soft blue dusk, and the fog is rising from the valley floor in slow, silent waves. You walk slowly, your body carrying a deep, pleasant tiredness that makes each step feel heavy and deliberate, as if you are walking through shallow water. The straw of your sandals is wet and cool against your feet, and the path underfoot is still soft from the rain, giving slightly with each step, a gentle, yielding surface that makes no sound except a faint, rhythmic squelch. The air smells of wet soil and crushed grass, and the clean, cold scent of the fog itself which drifts across the path in thin, ghostly ribbons that pass around your legs as you walk and then close again behind you. You carry nothing in your hands now. All the tools are in their places. All the tasks are done. Your arms swing loosely at your sides, and you feel the pleasant ache in your shoulders and your lower back, the kind of tiredness that comes from a full day of physical work done without hurry or strain. Your hands are clean and cold, the mud washed away in the stream behind the shed, and your fingers are slightly stiff from gripping tool handles and lifting stones. You flex them as you walk, opening and closing your fists, feeling the blood move through them, warm and slow. The rain cape is still across your shoulders, but you have pushed the wide hat back so that it hangs by its chin cord, and the cool evening air moves across your face and through your hair, fresh and damp and clean. The path climbs gently at first, winding around the edge of the middle terrace, and as you walk, you pass the places where you worked earlier in the day. Here is the lateral channel you cleared in the morning, its water running clean and fast, a soft silver sound in the darkness. You can hear it more than you can see it, a cheerful, liquid murmur that rises from somewhere below the path, and you know without looking that it is free of debris, its banks neat, its flow steady. The bamboo sheaths you pulled from it are a dark pile on the bank, already beginning to soften and decay, and soon they will be indistinguishable from the other leaf litter. You pass the spot where the channel narrows between the two large boulders, and you hear the water rushing through the gap with a low, throaty note, a sound that you recognize as clearly as a voice. The path levels out as you reach the middle terrace, and here the fog is thinner, pulled apart by some slight movement of the air, and you can see the paddy stretching away into the dusk. The water is a flat, dark mirror, perfectly still, and it reflects the pale grey sky with such fidelity that the paddy seems to contain a second, inverted world, a sky beneath your feet. The rice plants are dark shapes, standing in precise rows, and they are so still that they might be carved from stone. You stop for a moment, looking out across the water, and you remember the depression you filled, the slow trips back and forth with the basket of mud, the feel of the soft silt under your bare feet. The depression is gone now, filled and levelled, and the paddy is whole and even, holding its water as it should. You feel a quiet satisfaction, not pride exactly, but something more like contentment, a sense that the work was good and is now complete. You continue walking, and the path begins to climb again, steeper now, toward the upper terrace. The fog is much thinner here, only a faint haze that hangs in the air like breath on a cold morning, and above you the sky is beginning to clear. The clouds are breaking apart into separate ragged fragments, and between them the first true stars are emerging, faint white points of light that seem very far away and very old. You can see the constellation that your father called the rice spoon, a group of stars that rises in the east at this time of year and looks, if you tilt your head just right, like the long-handled ladle used for scooping cooked rice from the pot. It is a familiar sight, one you have seen on countless evenings just like this one, and its presence is comforting, a sign that the world is proceeding in its orderly way, that the seasons are turning as they should. You pass the stone steps you reset earlier, the ones where the lowest slab had tilted. In the darkness you cannot see the repaired foundation, but you can feel it when you step on the stone, the solid, firm resistance under your foot, no wobble, no shift. The step holds your weight and passes it down into the packed earth and gravel beneath, and you ascend without needing to think about it, your body trusting the repair because your hands made it. The top step is there, with this hairline crack that you decided to watch, and you make a mental note to check it again after the next heavy rain. The note is a small, quiet thing, barely a thought, and it joins the many other small notes you have made throughout the day, a quiet ledger of things to watch and tend. The upper terrace opens out before you, its broad expanse of water catching the starlight and the last pale glow of the western sky. The wall you repaired this morning is a dark line at the far end, and you cannot see the stones you reset, the clay you packed, the buttress you built. They are invisible now, just parts of the wall, no longer separate problems that needed your attention. The wall is whole, and it has returned to being simply what it is, a thing that holds the water and the earth, a thing that has stood for generations and will stand for more. You walk along the upper bund, your feet finding the narrow path easily, and you pause at the intake where the stream enters the paddy. The water pours through the bamboo gate with a steady musical sound, the same sound it made this morning, and the stones you adjusted are still in their proper places, guiding the flow cleanly into the paddy. Everything is as it should be, and you leave it there in the darkness and continue walking. The path now leaves the terraces behind, and enters the narrow strip of wild ground that lies between the upper paddy and the farmhouse. Here the grass grows long and uncut, and it brushes against your legs as you walk, wet and cool, leaving dark streaks of moisture on the cloth of your trousers. The path is fainter here, less travelled, because only you walk this way, and you must pay a little more attention to where you step, avoiding the roots and the stones that protrude from the earth. The fog has not reached this high. It pools in the valley below, a white sea that fills the low places and leaves the high ground clear, and the stars overhead are bright and sharp, their light cold and clean. The air smells different up here, less of water and mud, and more of the dry, resinous scent of the cedars, and the faint sweetness of wild flowers that grow among the grass. You can see the farmhouse now, a low, dark shape against the darker background of the hillside. There is no light in the windows, because you lit no lamp this morning, but the shape of it is familiar and welcoming, a solid, simple presence that has stood in this spot since before you were born. The thatched roof is a soft, rounded shadow, and the wooden walls are dark with the damp of the rain, and the whole structure seems to huddle against the hillside as if it too is tired and ready for rest. You approach it slowly, your pace slackening now that you are nearly home, and you feel the tiredness in your body deepen, a heaviness that is not unpleasant, but rather comforting, the body's way of saying that it has done enough. You reach the door of the farmhouse, a single wooden plank set in a frame, and you pause there for a moment, looking back the way you came. The terraces are below you, hidden now in the darkness and the fog, but you can still hear them. The sound of the drainage gate rises faintly from the valley, a distant, steady murmur that is the same sound you have been hearing all day and that will continue all night. It is a sound that has always been there, a constant background to your life, and you are so accustomed to it that you only notice it when you stop to listen. You listen now, standing in the cool, still air, and the sound is comforting, a reminder that the terraces are working, that the water is flowing, that the long, slow cycle of the hillside is continuing without pause. You turn back to the door and slide it open, and the familiar smell of the house washes over you, dry straw, old wood, the faint, clean scent of the earthen floor, and the lingering trace of the wood smoke from this morning's fire. The interior is dark, but you know where everything is, and you step inside and slide the door closed behind you. The house is small, a single room with a packed earth floor and a raised sleeping platform in one corner, and it contains only the few things you need. A low table, a clay teapot, a few bowls on a shelf, a small wooden chest for storing rice, a hearth made of stones set into the floor. Everything is in its place, and the simplicity of it is calming. A space that asks nothing of you. You sit down on the raised wooden step just inside the door and begin to remove your straw sandals. The cords are wet and a little swollen, and you have to work the knots carefully with your fingers, loosening them slowly so as not to break the strands. When the knots come free, you slip the sandals off and set them aside on the step to dry, and you feel the cool, packed earth of the floor under your bare feet, smooth and firm and familiar. You stand and remove the rain cape, shaking it gently to shed the last drops of water, and you hang it on the wooden peg beside the door, where it will dry overnight. The white hat goes on the peg above it, its brim casting a strange, circular shadow on the wall. You stretch your arms overhead, feeling the pull in your shoulders, the pleasant ache of tired muscles, and then you walk to the hearth in the center of the room. The hearth is cold now, but a small pile of ash still holds a few faint embers from the morning fire, buried and glowing dimly, and you kneel beside it and feed them with a handful of dry straw and a few thin twigs from the bundle beside the hearth. The straw catches with a soft, bright flame, and the twigs begin to crackle, and soon a small fire is burning, its light warm and golden, pushing back the darkness of the room. The smoke rises to the thatch and drifts out through the gap under the ridgepole, carrying with it the sharp, clean smell of burning cedar. You sit beside the fire for a moment, letting the warmth wash over your face and hands, feeling the cold and the dampness of the day begin to melt away. A large earthenware jar of water stands in the corner, and you dip a wooden basin into it and carry the basin back to the hearth to warm. You pour some of the water into a smaller bowl and use it to wash your hands and face, the warm water soothing on your skin, washing away the last traces of mud and the faint salt of dried sweat. You wash your feet too, dipping them into the basin and rubbing the soles with your hands, feeling the cold and the tiredness ease out of them. When you are clean, you pour the used water out the door, where it splashes softly onto the grass, and you hang the basin back on its hook. On the low table, a covered bowl has been left from this morning, a simple meal of cold rice and pickled vegetables that you prepared before you went out to the terraces. You sit down cross-legged on the woven straw mat beside the table, and you eat slowly, the rice cool and faintly sweet, the vegetables sour and crisp. The food is simple and good, and you eat without hurry, chewing each mouthful thoroughly, feeling the nourishment of it settle into your body. The fire crackles softly beside you, and the only other sounds are the distant murmur of the drainage gate and the occasional call of a night bird from the forest edge. The house is still and warm, and the tiredness in your body has become a kind of softness, a blurring at the edges of your awareness. When you have finished eating, you rinse the bowl with a little water and set it aside to dry, and then you bank the fire for the night, pushing the embers together and covering them with a thin layer of ash so that they will keep until morning. The room grows dimmer, lit only by the faint orange glow from the hearth, and the shadows gather in the corners, deep and soft. You walk to the sleeping platform, a raised section of the floor covered with a thin futon and a single cotton quilt, and you lie down, feeling the futon give under your weight, the straw padding rustling softly. The quilt is cool at first, but your body warms it quickly, and you pull it up to your chin and lie on your back, looking up at the dark underside of the thatch. The sounds of the night filter in through the wooden walls and the thatch. The drainage gate is still there, a distant, steady note, and now you can also hear the smaller, closer sound of the spring behind the shed, a faint trickle that you only notice when everything else is quiet. The fog outside has crept higher, and the air that comes through the gaps in the walls is cool and damp and smells of wet earth. A cricket is singing somewhere near the door, its thin, repetitive note rising and falling, and further away another cricket answers, their two songs overlapping in a soft, pulsing rhythm. The stars are bright overhead, but you cannot see them through the thatch, only sense them. A cold, clear light falling on the hillside and on the dark water of the paddies below. You think, as you lie there, about the day that has passed. The morning mist and the sound of water, the stones you lifted and replaced, the channel you cleared of leaves and silt, the bunds you patched, the steps you reset, the tools you sharpened, the heron standing motionless in the rain. Each task was small and simple, and yet together they formed a whole, a day of quiet, steady work that put the terraces back in order after the storm. And now the terraces are holding their water in the dark. The walls are firm, the channels are clear, the gates are set, and everything is as it should be. You feel a deep, quiet peace, a sense that you have done what needed to be done and that the rest can wait until tomorrow. Your breathing slows and your body sinks deeper into the futon, the tiredness spreading through you like the fog spreading through the valley. Your thoughts become slower, looser, drifting apart like the clouds after the rain, and you no longer try to follow them. The sound of the drainage gate fades into a distant hum, and the cricket's song blurs with the trickle of the spring, and the warmth of the quilt wraps around you like the mist wrapped around the hillside at dawn. Outside, the terraces stand dark and still, their water smooth and silent, reflecting the scattered stars. The rice plants are motionless in their neat rows, and the fog moves slowly among them, a soft, white presence that will linger until the sun burns it away. The drainage gate continues its quiet outflow, and the stream carries the water down through the valley, and the cycle goes on, steady and unhurried, as it has for generations. You do not hear it any more. Sleep comes gently, a gradual softening of all edges, and there is only stillness, and the quiet breathing of the hillside under the clearing night sky.